Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Rise in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, Itake mopes and is regretfully a little impolite to his partner in crime. Mission report, D0. 0124 hours reported breach of walls. Multiple assailants, origins unknown. Operative Cat 15 on standby. 0132 hours headquarters received reports of heavy assault on targets, Hokage Tower, Uchiha Compound, Hyuga Compound, Inyazuka Compound, Sarutobi Compound, Lower Market District, Westgate. 0138 hours Protocol 73I initiated. Cat 15 deployed to escort high-risk targets from Hyuga Compound to Rendezvous Point E7, RPE7. Arrived at Hyuga Compound. Primary target Hyuga Hinata located with escort Hyuga Niji, unranked. Secondary target Hyuga Hanabi located with escort Hyuga Makoto, Chiyunin. Both targets secured. Proceeded to RPE7 via East Gate. Ambushed in forest en route to rendezvous, 2 km and 1 km E of RPE7. 4 assailants killed. 1 casualty, Hyuga Makoto. 0357 hours arrived at RPE7, initiated lockdown. Both targets secure. Awaiting all clear. End report. Operative Cat 15. At the seasoned and jaded age of 13, Uchiha Itake had seriously considered only a few possible ways his life might go. However, life as a shinobi of course meant one had to expect the unexpected. Life and death, war and peace balanced delicately on the edge of a kunao. A village could be born or simply cease to exist overnight. But honestly, Itake had always known he'd live and die as a loyal shinobi of the leaf. Whether as Umbu, clan head, or simply a jounin, because there had been no doubt in anyone's mind that he'd reach jounin rank, though he'd on occasion wondered if he'd reach as high as the cage hat itself, he would die in the service of Konoha. And now, at the considerably wiser and worldlier age of 15, Itake could safely say that his 13-year-old self would never have thought he'd ever be a fugitive sitting down to a cup of tea within the same boundaries of the nation he'd sworn his life to. And especially not with his present company. Across from him, the ex-swordsman of the mist treated him to a pointy-toothed grin over a gently steaming cup of green tea. "Hi no kuni ain't so bad," he drawled, tapping a large finger along the edge of his cup. The fragile white porcelain looked almost absurd next to his calloused hands. Itake responded absently, letting his eyes drift outside the bijou tea shop. Rain was pouring down in steady sheets, cloaking the town in a hazy mist and churning the mud into a gritty slop. The villagers went about their business with ducked heads and plodding steps, huddled into their clothes for warmth or protection. I mean, the man across from him continued undeterred by Itake's non-answer, "The sun, when we first got here. That fucking sucked. But this," he waved a hand carelessly at the rain-splattered storefront. "I can get on board with this." He threw back the tea in his cup in one go like it was a shot, heedless of its heat, and thumped it back down on the table with a satisfied sigh. It must be the rain, Itake decided detachedly, that was making the normally taciturn Nukenin so talkative, when none of them really felt the need to talk at all. He eyed the other man blandly, who had reached gracelessly across the table to pour himself a refill. Ruthless, twisted, and a killer without a village to hold his loyalty. But weren't they all, in the end? Itake lifted his own cup to his lips for a sip. The tea here really was excellent. A strong flavor without being overwhelmingly bitter, the perfect drink for a rainy day. It helped that the innocuous tea house was located on the edge of the village center, really just a few bigger buildings in a sizable market. Close enough to any action that might occur, far enough to serve as a vantage point with several viable escape routes. A good vantage point always made his tea taste better. He listened with half an ear as his partner picked up a new thread, the criminal lack of fresh fish, when he caught a glimpse of light on metal. He paused, gave the man with the Konoha Hitai a discreet once-over as he walked past the tea house. Itake set his cup down gently, tapped it twice with 2 fingers as the man passed out of his sight line. Any halfway mediocre ninja knows better than to turn and look, and obviously Kiri's elite would be no different, but a slight narrowing at the corner of his eyes was clue enough to Itake that the other man had a lock on their target. His stream of rather one-sided conversation continued uninterrupted, however, and only petered out with a grumbled, "What a man has to do to get some decent goddamn sashimi around here, when Itaka fished a few coins out of his pocket and placed them on the tabletop. Itaki rose smoothly, mirroring his partner, and followed as the other man lumbered out of the booth in a gross contrast to his usual hunter's prowl. Which both of them were hunters. There weren't many ways for a Nuknin to be at least semi-legally quasi-employed, and generally the more illegal methods of earning money, robbing and or looting, tended to attract substantially more unwanted attention. So for now, they hunted down bounties and turned them in. Itaka's first step out of the tea house sank him ankle-deep into cold, sodden mud. He slogged onwards, glaring dispassionately at the ground as he trailed his partner through the streets. The rain had not let up, but the wide-brimmed hats that helped hide their faces also kept the water from their heads so they were reasonably dry. He hadn't yet caught sight of their target after he'd passed by their tea house, but he could easily find him again if they'd lost him. It just mean a couple hours longer in the rain and mud. He really preferred that they didn't, but more mistakes were made by Ninja in a hurry, and Itaki had not been sloppy since he was 6 and sliced his finger on a shuriken during target practice. So they'd take their time, and when they'd caught their prey and retreated to headquarters, Itaka would resist the urge to moan and complain the way his partner did when they did missions in Suna. Fortunately, the other man in question walked purposefully despite meandering through the muddy streets. In fact, there was a restrained glee as he waded through the mud that had nothing to do with the weather, more the thrill of a shark who'd caught the scent of blood. 10 meters later, Itaka's eyes caught his partner's hands flick 2 signals, lightning fast. There was no need to discuss now, only the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the rain between them now. No questions this far in the mission, only trust that the other would do their part. Itaka peeled off to the right, into the narrow alley between 2 grocery markets, and after a quick glance behind him, leaped straight up to land lightly on one of the roofs. He cut south, leaping easily from building to building while keeping low on slippery straw and tile alike. Finally, he perched on the roof of a bakery to wait, half obscured by the steam puffing up from the vents. From there he had an excellent line of sight to the motel room where a Konoha team, sans one, huddled to take shelter from the rain. It would be so easy. He knew who they were, faces in files, abilities, and other details listed dispassionately in paper and ink. None of them were a match for him. The 3 of them together would hardly give him a workout, especially not with them unawares and isolated. Those who kill their own comrades are sure to die a terrible death, he remarked absently to his partner. Sure, kid. The other man wasn't grinning his usual shark-toothed smile, but there was an air of satisfaction in a limp, incredibly bloody body slung over his shoulder. We good here. No movement. His team will not know that we have him. Itaka turned to eye the other man critically. Assuming you do not leave them a blood trail to follow. Get it cleaned up and meet me at the North Road out of town. There's rain, it'll wash away, grumbled the older man, rolling his eyes, but vanished off the roof the way he'd come nevertheless. Itaka cast a last glance at the motel window before dropping lightly off the roof. He took his time, wandering through the town, and by the time he reached the road leading out of town his partner was already there, this time with a slightly less suspicious oversized rucksack hanging off one shoulder. Without a word, Itaka took the lead, sprinting into the cover the forest offered. Here, away from the town, his movements melted back into their easy grace, strong and sure-footed as he pointed them back towards base. Even burdened, his companion kept up easily. Boss wanna ask this one a couple questions, he asked, not winded in the slightest. Yes, Itaki answered shortly. An expectant silence followed. Itaki, not feeling especially charitable, did not indulge it. The silence turned somewhat resentful, but Itaki had no wish to speak of anything until the pair were safely out of Hinokuni, even though they had not ventured more than half a day's run inside the borders to begin with. He may feel safe in the trees, but Konoha shinobi were at home up in the branches as well. It left the pair in a prime position to be ambushed. He kept his senses on high alert, steering them away from the routes commonly patrolled and the paths returning teams favored when traveling to and from the hidden village. The patrols were easy enough to evade. Even when there was no set schedule, there was always a pattern to find, and those patterns were high priority for him to keep up to date with. It was the teams returning from outside missions he was more concerned with. Moreover, his partner was much less one for subtlety and much more for kill first, questions later. Itaka didn't doubt they could handle any individual team that stumbled upon them, save perhaps an Umbu task force if it surprised them, but he disliked unnecessary casualties. Additionally, the disappearance of a team known to be within Fire's borders would doubtlessly attract attentions, which they needed to avoid. They ran until dawn, when the rain petered out and the sun's warm glow could be seen between the trees. The border for Hai no Kuni disappeared rapidly behind them. They deftly slipped between two border patrols with neither the wiser. Itaka stopped in a small copse of trees and stood patiently. He could hear the rush of the swollen river 20 meters ahead, and his partner's labored pants as he dropped his burden from his shoulder with a careless thud. Moments later, a narrow white muzzle nosed its way through the undergrowth. Its owner emerged fully from the bushes, stared at the pair, and turned. Itaka followed, and with much waspish muttering, so did his partner. "Caught you alive one," growled the older man, ducking into the cave after Itaka and tossing the sack to the ground. He folded his arms belligerently and glowered as if it had done him some personal insult. Itaka couldn't relate, but then again he hadn't been the one dragging it across two countries. From his seat on the ground, beside which lay a pile of unsharpened kunao, Kakashi regarded the two calmly. The hound they'd followed in, Bahei, settled comfortably by his master's feet. "Report," Kakashi directed at Itaka, even as his hands resumed their task with a whetstone and a blade. "Hi," Itaka responded. Zabuza shifted impatiently behind him, but he ignored the other Nukenin. "We arrived in Itate 6 days ago and established ourselves as travelers en route to Kawa no Kuni. 2 days after our arrival, the team from Konoha arrived as expected. 1 Jounin, Fukada Juro. 3 Chiyunin, Higuriko, Sekigakai Yori, Tabata Minoru. Fukada remained with at least one of his team for 2 days, but on the third he left his team and made his way across town to the informant's location. I watched the remaining team while Zabuza-san dash. I took him out behind the butcher shop," the swordsman cut in gruffly, not quite glaring at Kakashi. "Didn't give him a chance to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. Hit him around. Cut him up a bit. Knocked him out. Tied him up. Met back up with Itaka." The teammates were unaware of what happened. Itaka continued. "We departed the village at 1000 hours yesterday." The gray-haired nin eyed the body dubiously. "He'll survive." "Long enough," Zabuza grunted. "The informant." "None the wiser," Itaka answered smoothly. Kakashi nodded sharply. "Good work. Get some rest, I'll take care of this one." "Hi, Teiku." Itaka moved past Kakashi, deeper into the cave. The glint in Kakashi's eye was one he'd learned to be wary of. Even Zabuza behind him, with all his bravado and tendency towards alpha dog posturing, followed him quietly, subdued. Zabuza would never take orders from someone weaker than him. Unfortunately for him, he hadn't managed to best Itaka once in a spar. The ex-swordsman hadn't been deterred. Next time, he'd always growl around a bloody grin and the bruises mottling his bare skin. That, at least, was something Itaka admired about him. He rounded the bend, and a figure emerged from the shadows thrown by the solitary lantern. "Itaka-san." "Zabuza-san." Itaka inclined his head. "Haku-san," he greeted, then turned away to find his bedroll. "Hey, kid," the swordsman said behind him. "I hope you practiced that ice senbon." "Hi." Itaka could practically hear the younger shinobi beaming. "I was able to extend my range to 10 meters before the ice begins to crumble." And the Nukenin didn't sound impressed, but Itaka sensed his grudging approval. "I want that tripled by next week." "Hi, Zabuza-san." Zabuza grunted dismissively. "All right, shut up and keep watch. I need some sleep." As always, Itaka gathered his bedroll to the far corner of the cave, adjacent to the tunnel leading out. No sooner had he settled than a pair of quiet footsteps padded towards him. A cold nose nudged the tips of his fingers and vanished, and a second small body situated itself at his knees. It took a month of sleeping in the same room for Itaka to stop startling awake at any slight movement with just Kakashi and his ninkin, and now sleep was even longer in coming as he lay not 5 meters from 2 Nukenin from the village with the bloodiest history, who had willingly slaughtered their own comrades. But slowly, grudgingly, the other Nukenin were becoming part of the team. What would his mother think of him now? hunting shinobi from his own village with a team of Nukenin who had turned against theirs as well? Itachi had chosen peace, but Konoha had fallen into war anyways. All he could do now was live, and hope that one day it would be safe to return home. Shisui woke him 6 hours later, dripping rainwater unhappily onto the stone floor. Zabuza and Haku were both gone, but in the dim glow of the lantern he could make out the shapes of Baisuke and Guriko sprawled at his feet, bodies rising and falling slowly. Shisui. Itachi's voice was rough with sleep, but he hauled himself into a sitting position mercilessly. "Oh, Itachi," Shisui smiled crookedly. "Good mission." He confirmed. "No complications." His cousin raised an expectant eyebrow. "And?" Itachi scowled faintly, an expression only those close to him would recognize. "The weather was unpleasant," he added reluctantly. Shisui hummed in agreement. "I think the storm system caught up to you. It started raining 2 hours ago and hasn't let up yet." He reached up to peel his sodden Hitaiate from his head, then sent a hum of warm chakra through his body that Itachi could feel even from a meter away until he and his clothes were completely dry. Itachi watched him retie his forehead protector, still proudly bearing an unmarred leaf symbol, and crooked to mirror Kakashi Teiko. None of them had slashed their village symbols, not even the Kiri pair. After all, it wasn't as if the civilian villages they visited would know if they were missing nin. His cousin would call it sentiment, but Itachi was too practical for sentimentality. Shisui didn't feel the need to talk, especially not around Itachi. The cousins sat in companionable silence. He knew it wouldn't last, their RESPites never did last. One would think that not having a village would cut down greatly on responsibilities, but he couldn't be more wrong. The two Ninken sat up abruptly, startled out of dozing. Guriko wagged his tail as Kakashi strode into view, trailed by 2 other dogs. "Itachi, supply run," he said without preamble, tossing a scroll to the teen. "And turn in the bounty for Fukuda-san while you're at it. I believe IWA has the highest reward at present. I'll be leaving in the morning for 10 days or so with Pakun and Baisuke. Shisui, you're in charge while I'm away. Give Zabuza another day to rest, then send him and Haku to check on their contacts in Kusa." "Hi," murmured Itachi, echoed by Shisui. The older man nodded at them, then turned away to find his own sleeping role, shadowed by his Ninken. "Hey, caught a couple rabbits, if you're hungry," he tossed over his shoulder. Shisui heaved himself up with a sigh. "I'll get some food cooked, then." "Itachi?" "Teiko." "That would be appreciated," Itachi responded, rising gracefully to his feet. Kakashi waved a hand at them. "I'm fine." Shisui scowled at the older man, who had already bundled himself into his blankets under a pile of dog. "I'll save some for you, hey, take Teiko. Eat it when you get up," he said pointedly, and whirled out of sight before he could respond. Amused, Itachi found his sandals and slung his discarded cloak over his shoulders before following his cousin to the mouth of the cave. Dahei was already there, his narrow tail thumping the floor in interest as Shisui built up a small stack of wood and spat a tiny flame at it. It took a couple tries to light up, the wood was damp. Once he had a small if smoky fire going, the hound dropped a large rabbit in Shisui's lap with a wolfish grin and was rewarded with an ear rub. The dog was clearly already sated, if the traces of red around his mouth and round stomach were any clue. There were 2 other rabbits by his paws. "Make sure we don't suffocate," Shisui suggested as he pulled out a kunao. Itachi acquiesced, folding his hands into a sign and breathing out slowly. The smoke gathering at the ceiling drifted out, dispersed into the air outside rather than trailing skyward in a single column. He kept it up as he watched his cousin shuck and gut the rabbits with sure hands before throwing them into a pot with water, a handful of tubers, and salt. Maybe 20 meters out, he could feel the chakra signatures of Zabuza and Haku both muted, but the former still and steady while the latter flitted and fluctuated. Aside from them, the forest was calm and silent. The nearest village was 4 hours running, and hardly anyone traveled through this patch of woods. Still, Itachi hadn't relaxed, not truly, since he'd left Konoha. He'd taken the protection of the village for granted, he knew now. "Ryo, for your thoughts." Shisui cut in, quirking an amused eyebrow. He covered the pot with its lid and sat back. Itachi shook his head dismissively. There was no use dwelling on useless musings. His cousin narrowed his eyes disbelievingly but didn't press. Gehazi's ears pricked, swiveled in the direction of the forest for a moment before the hound relaxed again. Zabuza and Haku emerged, the former bleating his customary languid grace, the latter with a flush belying the exhilaration he tried to hide beneath a proper shinobi's nonchalance. The other teen was just a few years younger than Itachi, yet Haku was still innocent enough to find excitement in training, to delight in his own capabilities and marvel at what he could accomplish. In him, Itachi remembered Sasuke's eager eyes and drive to learn. "Good morning," the younger shinobi greeted politely as they approached. Zabuza graced them each with a brusque nod before brushing past, but Haku didn't follow. Itachi tilted his head inquisitively when Haku fidgeted, twisting his fingers into his sleeve. "Itachi-san, I was wondering if you might like to spar with me," he asked hopefully, eyes bright despite the fact that his hair had been all but plastered to his head. Purposefully shoving aside the invasively bittersweet memories that threatened to come to the forefront, Itachi glanced over at Shisui, who made a lazy shooing motion with one hand. "I can handle the fire without you," his cousin reassured, mouth twitching in an amused smirk. Itachi rose to his feet and nodded to Haku. "Lead the way, Haku-san." He caught the tail end of a genuine smile before Haku turned, Haori fluttering, and leapt back out of the cave mouth. Itachi ghosted out after him with silent, sure footsteps and followed him to the same clearing he'd sensed his and Zabuza's chakra before. The rain was coming down as though he'd never left it, hampered only slightly by the leaves and branches overhead. Itachi bore it with a grim stoicness, walking lightly on top of the mud. "Would taijutsu only be alright with you, Itachi-san?" Haku asked as Itachi slipped out of his cloak. "Acceptable, yes," he answered, beginning a few stretches to warm up muscles gone stiff in the cold, damp cave. "Do you wish to include tools in combat? If that's okay with you." It was difficult to dislike Haku, who was always unfailing polite and painfully earnest. He was the one who made an effort to connect to the Konoha shinobi, always helpful and friendly, and he meant it. Where Zabuza was suspicious and spurned friendly overtures, Haku was open, and as far as he could tell, honest. Doubtlessly those qualities made him all the more deadly when he turned around as a killer with empty eyes and a fistful of ice, but he was pleasant as a teammate. That's fine with me," he answered, turning to face Haku. Immediately, he ducked under the trio of senbon hurtling towards his head, neatly sidestepped a kick, and gave Haku an open-handed shove behind the shoulder to propel him past when the younger boy lunged. Haku was fast, but not as fast as Itachi had been at 13 at least, not without his Hayaton. Even so, he recovered quickly, and Itachi jerked back as Haku's roundhouse kick displaced the air in front of his face. 2 steps back out of the way of the continued onslaught, then he whipped out a kunao in time to deflect Haku's senbon with a loud clang. The younger's eyes were alight and focused, intent on Itachi as he whirled in and then away. Itachi pressed his advantage, following Haku's retreat with a hurled kunao that the other twisted to avoid. He lashed out with a kick that Haku ducked, spun around with the momentum in time to block a punch and exchanged a flurry of blows before landing a kick that sent the younger teen skidding back in the mud. Itachi didn't push this time, instead using the respite to draw another 2 kunao. Haku sprang from his crouch to meet him, 3 senbon spouting from each hand like claws. They met in a clash of metal, and Itachi took advantage of his superior strength to bear down on the Haku. The younger twisted hard with one hand, and rather than allow his kunao to be torn from his grip, Itachi turned with it, flipping sideways, and yanked their locked blades towards himself when his feet touched the ground. Haku didn't allow himself to be yanked forwards, instead, he let one of his senbon take the brunt of the force, and it was sent flying off to the side as he leapt after Itachi. Itachi evaded neatly, ducking under Haku's arm and landing a twisting kick to throw him back a couple steps. He sent one kunao spinning at Haku, then the other, but each was met by a senbon and both deflected off harmlessly to the sides. But it was enough to give him an opening. Itachi pounced with the finesse of a panther, one hand catching Haku's wrist before he could hurl his senbon, the other smoothly drawing a kunao and pressing it to Haku's throat in one swift movement. For a few seconds they froze, a tableau grossly contrasting the veritable blur they had been just a few moments prior, and then Itachi let go and stepped back, slipping the blade back into its holster. Haku straightened, his hair sopping wet and in slight disarray, and his clothes splattered with mud. Again, he requested, eyes sparkling with anticipation. Itaka considered, blinking the rain out of his eyes. He consented, and then they were off again. Itaki enjoyed combat in that it was simple. Straightforward. He did not desire to injure his opponents, but there was a sort of satisfaction to be gained from his mastery of his own body, his chakra, validated not simply by emerging victorious, but from the knowledge that hours of hard work and endless dedication had indeed paid off. Sparring was a different chessboard from the politics of everyday life, and Itaki had enough control that he could afford to relax his mind during a match. He had never been a denier of reality, but afforded himself the luxury of a brief escape every now and then, though he was careful to curb his speed and reflexes. Despite their cordial interactions, Itaka would be a fool to display anything near his full abilities, and a greater fool to assume Haku would either. But as long as their arrangement remained beneficial for the two ex-Kirinin, and so long as Zabuza's strange sense of honor remained intact, Itaka knew he could generally trust the two at his back in battle. And no matter how ironically Zabuza called Kakashi boss, Itaki amused himself by noting that they were growing on the swordsman, so to speak. Just the other day, he'd abruptly and somewhat begrudgingly shared with Kakashi a jutsu that could keep his mask, or bandages, in Zabuza's case, dry for a long period of time without a constant drain of chakra, to the Koppinin's slight bemusement. And he was finally allowing Haku alone with the other members of their team without his supervision, when in the beginning he'd glower and skulk in the shadows every time Haku so much as looked in someone else's direction. As far as Itaka could tell, allowing him to spar with his apprentice alone was the pinnacle of a trust display, for all that Zabuza insisted Haku was simply another tool in his belt. Itaka managed to pin Haku another handful of times before he called a halt. The younger nin's chest was heaving slightly with exertion, and his face was flushed. Itaka himself was still quite fresh, but Haku had been training already while he slept, and he certainly didn't need Zabuza to scowl at him for the next week if he returned his apprentice half dead from exhaustion. Especially if Haku caught a cold. Both their clothes were heavy and soaked through from the downpour, and he would be shivering if he hadn't been moving about. "Thank you for the spar, Itaka-san," Haku said, bowing slightly. Itaki inclined his head. "It was no trouble," he replied, and meant it. While Haku retreated back to the cave, Itaka detoured to the river to bathe and clean his clothes, flecked with mud and sodden plant matter. The rain was cold, but the river was glacial. Itaka bathed quickly, sending shocks of warm chakra through his body to combat the freezing waters. He dried his clothes the same way as best as possible, then made his way back to their headquarters. Inside the cave, Shisui and Uhei had been joined by the hulking bull, whom the former was currently using as a backrest. He hummed a greeting as Itaki approached, sending one last burst of chakra to dry his clothes once he was out of the rain. The small fire was out now, the pot nestled in the glowing coals of its remains. Itaka met Shisui's eyes and tilted his head towards it inquiringly. "It's ready," Shisui confirmed. "I thought we'd wait for you to get back." "Haku's getting the bread." Itaka frowned slightly. "You didn't need to." His cousin shrugged, a careless smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We didn't mind. Haku didn't think you'd be long. We're not waiting for Kakashi, in any case. I imagine if we waited for Teiko, we would have to call it breakfast," Itaka deadpanned, and was gratified to see Shisui smirk. "The disrespect. He'd be heartbroken if he heard you." They ate their stew in trenchers made of stale bread that Zabuza bought it in. It ate some time before completing their mission, possibly because Zabuza had a soft spot for the Ninken, who loved gnawing on the used trenchers. And they still hadn't replaced the metal set lost when Kakashi used the storage scroll they were sealed in as a decoy to steal a scroll out from under the noses of a Kumo team. Itaka made a mental note to look for replacements during his supply run. Zabuza and Haku sat on the dusty floor across from him and Shisui, the pot of rabbit stew between them. Uhei had since migrated to the Kirinin's side, as he had found out early on that Haku was more than willing to give him the pets and ear rubs that Kakashi claimed would spoil his hounds rotten. They didn't talk while they ate, but the silence was considerably more comfortable than the first few tension-charged weeks of their cohabitation. As ever, the stew was nowhere near filling enough for 3 teenagers and a grown man, especially not Shinobi, but it was at least more satisfying than the dry, tasteless nutrition bars they ate otherwise. Kakashi breezed out with a pair of ninkin at his heels when Itachi was finishing up and Zabuza had pulled out his sword in an oiled cloth for maintenance. He was dressed for travel already, with a plain brown travel cloak over a battered flak jacket and a pack slung over one shoulder. Shisui intercepted him with a trencher already filled with stew before Kakashi could make it out of the cave. Kakashi glanced at the food, then Shisui's expectant face before taking it, slouching against the wall to eat. And because Kakashi was Kakashi, he turned his head away to eat, to Zabuza's disappointed interest. By the time Itachi departed for IWA, the sun would have been bleeding out over the trees if it hadn't been for the persistent rain. Instead, a light gray glow settled with the mist in between the trees as he leapt from branch to branch. Beside him ran the winsome Shiba, whose companionship on the trip Itachi had apparently won when he'd given the ninkin his bread trencher. Itachi had never considered himself a dog person, not with his clan's frequent contracts with the Niniko. But since Itachi joined the team, Kakashi's ninkin had always been forward in a way that their summoner was not, nosing up to all 5 teammates with blatant disregard for personal space and an ineffable affability. Even Akino, the most aloof of the pack, would randomly wander up and simply sprawl on his side near Zabuza, which Shisui for some reason found hilarious. As friendly as the ninkin were, however, and excluding their apparent leader Pakun, they never spoke to anyone except Kakashi, though Itachi knew for certain that each was capable of it. Around the other members of the team, they simply behaved like, well, dogs. Ninja dogs, but still dogs. Itachi eyed Shiba out of the corner of his eye. The ninkin grinned at him, tongue lolling from his mouth. The company, albeit unusual, was comforting. While Itachi had never been especially social, his sense of loneliness had increased exponentially since he'd left Konoha. At least in the village he'd had his comrades, his parents, and his clan. Until well. The less he thought about that, the better. Most of all, he missed Sasuke. Was he happy? Was he even alive? He wished he had taken his brother when he fled. The sun had set and risen again by the time Itachi and Shiba reached Ashino, a small town in Iwa inhabited only by civilians save for a rickety bounty office. It would be at this office that Itachi turned in Fukada's body, but first, he checked in a room at the local motel. He was in no rush and had stopped only once along the way to rest and eat. Shiba had wandered off as soon as they entered town. The ninkin undoubtedly had his own reconnaissance to perform, and association with a shinobi would grant him unwelcome suspicion should there be another visiting shinobi among the civilian inhabitants. He would find Itachi again when he was ready, but until then he was unbothered should the dog to do as he wished. Itachi set traps at the door and window, then let himself collapse into the sagging bed. It had been a long journey. When he next opened his eyes, the sun had passed its zenith. Here, there was no trace of the clouds that had dogged Hinokuni or the hideout, and when he made his way down to the street he was greeted by clear blue skies and a warm breeze. Incongruous in the henge of a middle-aged man in a sturdy, worn cloak, Itachi observed the bustle of the town from a table at a noodle shop. Picking placidly at his meal, he watched with some amusement as Shiba trotted into view, whining hopefully at a pair of boys holding meat skewers. Neither boy proved willing to cede their meal to an ostensible stray, and took off giggling towards the residential part of town. Itachi let a smile tug the corner of his mouth as Shiba drooped in disappointment, thwarted. He paid the bill, snagging a bit of leftover chicken in his hand, and strode over to the ninkin, who glanced up with a wagging tail. Incorrigible, he told the dog, who eagerly licked the food from his palm and snuffled happily. In the span of an afternoon, Shiba had somehow managed to find enough dirt that his light coat now was speckled with brown, and for all appearances he was just another stray begging for scraps on the streets. A passerby chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll never get rid of him now," the man warned with a good-natured grin. "Mutts around here, feed 'em once and they never forget you." "Ah," Itachi feigned sheepishness, glancing down at the ninkin's wolfish grin. "Is that so?" And thus Shiba had reason to follow him back to the hotel, though the dog stayed skulking in the shadows while Itachi went up. In his room, he dropped the henge and retrieved the scroll containing Fukada Jiro's body. A sighting of him in Iwa would keep Konoha's current leadership wary and guessing if word of his presence ever got back there. If not, there was no harm done in garnering a reputation even here. Scroll in hand, Itachi stepped out of the doorway and glanced around for Shiba. Sudden movement caught his eye among the usual flow of traffic along the street, and he cast a perfunctory look at its source, a pair of dark-haired street urchins dashing across the cobblestones. One had bandages wrapped around his eyes, towed by the hand by the younger. And just as Itaka was turning away, the second boy turned in his direction, and Itaka caught his breath as the pair vanished into an alley. Heedless of the annoyed grumbles of the villagers in whose paths he was standing, Itaka stood, frozen, his gaze distant as his mind worked in endless loops and possibilities, and Shiba whined and nudged increasingly urgently at his hand. His mouth opened and closed around a soundless word. Itaka's world started turning the day he held his baby brother in his arms for the first time, and he knew he would slaughter entire nations to keep him safe. He was 11 and reeling from his cousin's death when he took the weight of his village's future onto his shoulders. 2 years later he stood in the clan compound with the blood of the girl who had loved him on his blade, and too late he realized he had loved her too. His world was awash with crimson and black as the village came to pieces around him. It would be another 6 months before they found Shisui, an empty socket where an eye used to be, and he had felt hope flutter to life. But none of that compared to the way the world fell away completely when Itaka was 15, staring at the boy with his brother's face in a small civilian town in Iwa. Chapter 2, Temari is the mom friend we all need in our lives. Mission Report, D2. 1,323 hours Operative Dog 4 arrived at RPE-7 with high-risk target Uchiha Sasuke. Dog 4 and escort Uchiha Risuke, Jounin, were assaulted en route to Rendezvous Point E8. 6 assailants killed. 1 casualty, Uchiha Risuke. Dog 4 heavily injured. Dog 4 remained in hiding for 36 hours due to blood loss. Dog 4 took 2 soldier pills, rerouted to RPE-7 with target. 1,327 hours death of Dog 4 due to inflicted injuries, exsanguination, chakra depletion. Uchiha Sasuke redesignated as Operative Cat 15's tertiary target. 1,335 hours cadaver sealed in scroll for later burial. 1,338 hours Cat 15 began 1 km radius sweep to ensure lack of pursuit and/or discovery. Targets left in care of Hyuganiji. 1,354 hours sweep concluded, no movement. Primary and secondary targets secure. Tertiary targets secure. No contact from HQ. Awaiting all clear. End report. Operative Cat 15. It had been over a month since Nico-sensei had last stopped by. Temari and Sai were doing inventory in the storage room of the abandoned warehouse they'd commandeered as temporary headquarters when Niji and Sasuke burst in. Sasuke was pale, eyes wide, with none of the composure he usually wore like a favorite cloak. At his side, Niji was tense, and worried enough that Temari could see none of his usual resentment. Someone recognized Sasuke, he said without preamble, and Temari could feel the blood draining from her own face. She thrust her cardboard tack paper makeshift clipboard at Sai. Get the others, she told him tightly, then whirled back to Niji as Sai bolted from the room. What happened? She snapped. Food run in town, near the motel. We were crossing the street when he spotted us, he answered, keeping pace with her as she hurried through the hallway. 160-170 centimeters, slight build. Long black hair kept in a ponytail. Plain dark clothes, flak jacket in Konoha style, Konoha Hitai, brown traveling cloak. He recognized Sasuke but didn't pursue. Are you sure he recognized him? She asked, turning towards Niji, staring where she knew his eyes were beneath the bandages. It was a testament as to how serious the situation was that Niji didn't even bristle at her questioning. He said. Otauto, Sasuke interrupted quietly, slightly behind Niji. Temari's eyes snapped to the younger boy as he continued, he called me Otauto. It was my brother, Uchiha Itaka. There was a beat of silence when Temari couldn't think of anything to say. Niji's mouth was a grim slash across his face. Okay, she said at last. Okay. She took a fortifying breath and strode through the hall into the main room, the boys at her back. The warehouse was possibly the nicest place they'd stayed in, despite the rotting floorboards and gaping holes in the ceiling. Their main room was the largest portion of the biggest room that had a continuous roof, about 5 square meters, walled off from the rest by stacks of empty crates and kept meticulously clear of the broken glass and other debris that littered the floor. Sakura and Hinata were already huddled together, but stopped their murmured conversation when Temari swept in. Sakura looked up, her eyes calm despite her pale face, but Hinata was trembling, toying nervously with the bandages over her eyes. Above them perched Gaara, silent and watchful, his agitation betrayed by the shifting sand flowing over and around his hands. The last member of their group clattered down the stairs and into the room, barely 10 seconds after Niji and Sasuke sat on overturned crates. "We have a code 2 red 2, Temari said, cutting off whatever Naruto might have said before he opened his mouth with a sharp look. The blonde glared back furiously, but plopped down on a crate without responding. Sai slipped in like a shadow and lurked in the makeshift entryway. Sasuke was identified in the marketplace today. Sasuke. The younger boy flinched, just a twitch. His name is Uchiha Itachi, he said, his voice monotone, and glared blankly ahead at the opposite wall. And he's 15 years old. Umbu, either A rank or S rank in most bingo books, specializes in genjutsu and ninjutsu, skilled at taijutsu and kenjutsu. Has a fully developed Sharingan. We don't know his affiliation, Temari said, when Sasuke didn't continue. The intel Nico-sensei gave us suggests that he went missing after that night, but we don't know that he wouldn't try to kill us or sell us to the highest bidder. Sasuke's eyes could have burned a hole through the crate. Naruto and Sakura exchanged a glance over his head. Sasuke and Niji, Temari said decisively. Focus on evasion. You've already been spotted together, so stay together. Keep to the busier parts of town, and if he tries to take you, make as much noise as possible. Sigh. The pale boy straightened. Give Niji the tanto. Between the 8 of them, they had 3 dozen kunao and 1 tanto, the latter of which was usually shared between Niji and Sai, who were most proficient with it. Now, Sai unclasped the somewhat battered blade and tossed it to Niji, who caught it without turning his head. Even now, not a single protest or snide remark from Niji. What a miracle. Sai, you need to get a message to Nico-sensei, she continued. Get in hiding and stay hidden, no matter what happens to the rest of us. Got it. Sai nodded sharply, his face blank and serious. Sakura, Gaara, go with him and keep him safe. Hinata and Naruto, you come with me for surveillance. Hi, said Naruto, eyes bright with determination. Hinata nodded from the opposite side, equally resolute though her hands were trembling. Okay, let's go, Temari declared. Everyone grab what you need and clear out within 5 minutes. Keep in touch, and hopefully I'll see you all on the other side. It was a grim conclusion. But they'd rehearsed this before, so everyone knew what to do, at what was at stake. Most of the others immediately vanished, clattering up the stairs or down the hall to the storeroom to grab packs, clothes, weapons, or food and water. There was none of the usual cheerful chatter, and as necessary as it was, Temari was sorry to be the cause. Niji lingered, fixing a serious stare on her as he turned the sheathed tanto over in his hands. She'll be okay. I promise, Temari said, although she knew better than to make promises she couldn't keep. She should be with Sai, hiding, he said immediately. An unsealed Byakugan makes her a vulnerable target. My team would be flying blind without her, countered Temari. If you and Sasuke are taken, I need to know to get you back, or to make sure the others aren't targeted. He looked unconvinced, a frown marring his normally impassive face. Her life. I'll take care of her, Temari said, meeting his eyes as best she could. Niji studied her face for a second before nodding. I entrust her safety to you, he said at last before he too vanished into the depths of the warehouse. Temari rubbed her eyes tiredly. She honestly had too much on her plate to deal with Niji's old-fashioned sensibilities, but somehow the added responsibility weighed on her that much more. With a whisper of shifting sand, Gaara hopped down from his perch. Automatically, Temari reached out a hand to ruffle his hair, and he leaned into it with eyes half closed like a cat. You will be in danger, he said at last. We all will, Temari sighed. The sand hissed, expressing his displeasure more effectively than his blank face. I don't like this. I should protect you. Temari carted a hand through his hair. I need you to protect Sai, she explained patiently. We need him to call Nico-sensei. Gaara frowned mutinously, tilting his face up towards her. I can protect you better than Nico-sensei, he argued. Maybe, but then we'd have to leave Naruto and Sasuke and everyone. Won't you miss them? Temari cajoled. Gaara's scowl deepened. I can protect all of them, he insisted. Temari sighed, guiding Gaara out so she could pack her own things. If you kill him, people will notice. And then we have to run all the time, and Hinata will be afraid all the time, and the others won't sleep enough. You're special, Gaara, but everyone else needs to sleep or they'll be sad and hurt all the time. He simmered, staring at the ground with narrowed eyes. Fine, he snapped, and stormed away with clouds of sand whirling up at every step. Temari watched him go wryly before hurrying to pack. There were 7 fugitive shinobi children depending on her. Temari was only 12, but she was strong. She would have to be enough. She was the last one out. Everyone had vanished into the town except Naruto and Hinata, who lurked in the shadows near the wall. She summoned a weary smile for them, though of course only Naruto could see it. Let's go, she said, reaching out to take Hinata by the hand. She followed easily, and Naruto trailed resolutely at her heels. They had protocols for this, though they had never actually had to use them, so in theory, they knew what they were doing. "Ne-chan," Naruto said, muffled under a battered cough mask, as they meandered towards the marketplace. We're going to be okay, right? Unusually vulnerable, especially for Naruto. Yeah, she answered, turning towards him with a practiced smile. She squeezed Hinata's hand reassuringly for good measure. Nico-sensei told us this would happen, remember? We just need to do as she says and everything will be fine. Mollified, Naruto flashed her back a tentative smile and skipped up to take her other hand. Temari repressed a flinch. 2 years on the run, one of which with constant surprise ambushes, left her reluctant to have both hands occupied. But she was reluctant to shake off Naruto when she could tell he was genuinely afraid, and she certainly couldn't let go of Hinata. At the border of Ashino's residential and market districts was a small hostel. Here, Temari let go of both their hands to knock on the door. The welcoming smile slipped off the face of the Baa-san, who opened the door as she eyed their threadbare clothes and greasy hair dubiously. Acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance, the bandages covering Hinata's eyes, and the cloth mask hooked across Naruto's face, Temari beamed up at her disarmingly. We have money, she promised, and reluctantly, the Baa-san opened the door wider. Charm, Temari had learned, was both a gift and a skill. Our father is a traveling merchant, she told the Baa-san after she'd left Naruto and Hinata in the room the three of them would share. He sends us money every month, but we're saving it. We want to buy a horse. A horse? Exclaimed the Baa-san in surprise. Yup. Temari dimpled. Tio-san only has Mora now, and she can't pull the wagon if it's too heavy. So if we get Tio-san another horse, he can go places faster and carry more things. Oh, said the Baa-san, turning to give Temari a thoughtful glance. Your father must be happy to have such filial children. I hope so, Temari agreed cheerfully. Say, do you need help with dinner, Baa-san? Set up with a large basket of vegetables, a knife, and a chopping board, Temari let her mind wander. When she'd first encountered the Konohan children, none of them could cook. Through her own efforts, each of them could at least boil ramen with some kind of fresh toppings, though Naruto had learned only after inflicting several large stove fires on the others, and Neji generally refused to cook anything that took more than half an hour and therefore ended up with very plain meals. Temari had learned to cook first through academy classes, then by a private tutor, which was likely in an effort to make her a more appealing bride. Oh, you're very good with a knife, dear, the Baa-san noted, leaning over to inspect her work. Temari glanced down in surprise, where she'd reduced the assorted vegetables to neat, thin slices. Oh. Yes, I love to cook. Dinner was a tomato stew with eggplant, zucchini, and onion over rice. Eat slowly, she told Naruto when she went to retrieve him and Hinata. And don't eat more than 2 bowls. And be polite. Yes, Ne-chan, he said, rolling his eyes before bouncing down the stairs. Hey, Baa-san. That smells great. Hinata hesitated, making no move towards the stairs. Temari stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Any news? She asked, her voice low. Ano, Hinata began, twisting the hem of her shirt in her hands, Niji and I-san and Suzuki-kun are walking in the M Market. Niji says nobody has approached them yet. I see can't see where S-sai-kun or S-sakura-chan or Gigi-gara-kun are, but Niji says they sent a message out already. So everyone's doing fine, Temari concluded, and Hinata nodded hesitantly. Good, she said decisively. Come down to dinner then, Hinata. She held out her hand, and Hinata took it delicately. With the deftness of long practice, Temari guided Hinata down the stairs and had her seated before the other occupants of the hostel appeared. One man smelled faintly musty, and his clothes were finely dyed if faded around the edges, a cloth merchant. The other guests were a young couple who were clearly smitten with each other, from their frequent sideways glances and poorly hidden grins. Naruto had helped himself already to a heaping bowl, and after a stern look from Temari, visibly restrained his normally blistering pace, mask rolled up to just above his mouth to allow him to eat. Eating would distract him from conversation, so she wouldn't need to cover up any blunders Naruto made. He was literally the worst liar she had ever met. She filled Hinata's bowl first, then guided one of her hands to her spoon and the other to her bowl. From there, the younger girl managed on her own and Temari turned to her own meal. Young girls didn't make conversation with strange older men, so Temari ate silently with half an eye on Naruto, who would go make conversation with strange older men if left to his own devices. After dinner, Naruto pulled Hinata back up to their room, but Temari lingered until the other tenants had vanished. Baa-san, Temari said. Do you need help with the dishes? The old woman beamed at her. Oh, no, darling, you were already such a help with dinner. Run on up to your brother, and, sister. She's adopted, Temari explained offhandedly. Her parents died in the same bandit attack where she was blinded, but they were close friends with my father so he took her in. Oh, the Baa-san cooed. The poor dear. That's very generous of your father. Temari dimpled, then skipped back upstairs to their room, but let the smile drop off her face the moment the door closed behind her. Hinata, perched on the far bed, slowly unraveled the bandages around her eyes as Temari flopped onto the other bed with a sigh. Ne-chan, said Naruto from his perch on the rickety wooden table on the other side of the room. Responded Temari absently, scrubbing a hand over her face. We're stuck here in this room and all, right? So can I practice my tree walking? The wood squeaked under his anticipatory bouncing. I gotta keep training so if that bastard gets captured dash. Naruto, Temari interrupted. I can save his sorry dash. Naruto. Temari glared at Naruto, unimpressed, with one eye. Hinata stifled a giggle, one hand coming up to cover her mouth delicately. Naruto grinned sheepishly, scratching the back of his head self-consciously. Hey, sorry. Naruto, Temari paused. What happens if you don't channel the right amount of chakra when you wall walk? I get pushed off the tree. Temari raised an eyebrow. And Naruto's face screwed up in concentration. I fall. And, though it could be frustrating, he really was adorable when he tried to think his way through a puzzle. Tired as she was, Temari couldn't help but smile a little at his absent frown. I blast a hole in the tree. So what happens if you do that in a room? Naruto growled in frustration. Arg, fine, I get it. He kicked back until he was lying flat on the table. But, Ne-chan, we have to do something. We're doing everything we can, Temari sighed. We just need to keep an eye on Niji and Suzuki, and Hinata's doing a good job with that already. Here she fumbled for her pack and fished out a small pad of paper, which she chucked at Naruto's head. It bounced off his forehead and he caught it with an offended squawk and flailing arms. You can practice the leaf sticking exercise. You mean paper sticking exercise, he teased, with a shadow of his usual bright grin. Temari rolled her eyes. Whatever, you brat. Just hurry up and practice already. She flopped back with a sigh and turned her head to watch Hinata. The younger girl sat in seiza, hands folded neatly, and her face was serene save for the veins bulging angrily around her eyes. Temari repressed the shiver from the sheer wrongness. Even after more than a year, she had yet to feel comfortable with that particular Kekii Genkai. With a slow breath, Hinata exhaled and let the Byakugan fade from her eyes. Niji Nni-san and S Suzuki-kun are staying in the B basement below the N noodle shop. But I still can't find the NNN Nuknan TTT. She couldn't finish, her nervousness spilling into uncontrollable stutters before she drew in a deep breath and forcibly stilled her trembling hands. Did you see Sai? Temari asked quickly. Hinata shook her head, face falling. He still isn't in my R range. But Niji Nii-san says he has sent out T2 waves of M messages already. Nico-sensei never told them where she went when she left them, so the only way of contacting her was sending out Sai's ink animals in all directions in the hopes that at least one of them found her. Okay. Great work, Hinata. Temari let her eyes slide shut briefly before opening them again. Bath, she suggested. The two girls left Naruto in the room, papers sticking to his forehead for 1 or 2 seconds before shooting off towards the opposite wall to his disgruntled mutters. While Hinata bathed, Temari leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes, spreading out her senses to the rest of the house. The Baa-san bustled around in the kitchen downstairs, and the other tenants moved about their own rooms, muted chakra signatures flickering faintly. Naruto's roiled a little more strongly in their room as he fought for control over his exercise. Presently, one of the chakra signatures emerged from a room, accompanied by the squeak of a door, and Temari opened her eyes to see the young woman pad tentatively towards the bathroom, offering Temari an uncertain smile when she saw her. Temari smiled back and knocked lightly against the bathroom door. Imuto, she said deliberately. Are you almost done? Someone is waiting for the bathroom. A shuffle of cloth within. Oh, one more moment, please, floated Hinata's soft voice. After a brief pause and a whisper of chakra, the door slid open. Hinata stood in the doorway, eyes staring blankly ahead, one hand braced against the frame of the door and the other clutching the bundle of soiled laundry at her side. Temari reached for her hand as the other guest gasped at the genjutsu of scars and cloudy eyes layered over Hinata's face. She managed a strained smile as Temari guided the younger girl back out into the hallway towards their room. As they walked in, the paper that had reluctantly clung to Naruto's forehead blew off with a whoosh. It fluttered to the ground, joining a dozen others that surrounded him like a pile of leaves. Naruto grimaced, and without looking reached over to pull another piece off the pad. Hey, Temari snapped. She kicked the door closed and hurled a shuriken in the same motion. Naruto snatched his hand back just in time and turned a wounded, indignant stare on Temari. "Nei-chan, what was that for?" he whined. "Stop wasting paper," she scolded, scooping the loose sheets off the floor. "All you needed was one." Naruto pouted exaggeratedly. "But this way is faster. And you can still use that paper, anyways." Temari mock growled and swatted at his head with the papers. "I'm going to take a bath," she grumbled, dropping the stack on the table and retrieving her shuriken. "Then you're going to take one. And then you're going to take first watch. You better not have made a mess when I get back." Naruto widened his eyes innocently. "Me?" Temari grabbed her toiletries from her bag and rolled her eyes. "Keep an eye on him, Hinata," she warned, ignoring Naruto's offended noise. Hinata ducked her head and smiled. As a child, Temari had been a morning person. As a child, however, Temari had not taken the middle night watch shift, resulting in less than 6 hours total of interrupted sleep. She was still growing. She was supposed to get at least 8 hours of consecutive sleep a night. She glared blearily at the window and the offending sunlight spilling into the room. She made no move to get up. Naruto was still snoring gently on the bed behind her. However, Hinata was up and running through katas in the space in front of the beds, barefoot. Hinata's creepy clan had a beautiful fighting style. She'd give them that, at least. She rolled over and propped her chin on folded arms to watch the younger girl. Where Niji flowed through the same katas with the coiled grace of a tiger, Hinata's movements were light and delicate, almost hesitant. From what she could tell, Hinata was actually quite good at the juken. She just lacked the confidence or willingness to actually hit someone. Her cousin had no such reservations. While Temari could take Hinata down handily in a taijutsu spar, Niji beat her consistently. In an all-out fight with ninjutsu, however, Temari was confident she would come out on top. The only person in their little group that she knew could kill her without batting an eye was Gaara. And if all worked out as planned, that would never be an issue. Naruto snuffled and tangled his legs further into his blanket. Temari twisted to grab her pillow and tossed it at the blonde head. Hey! Time to get up, she called, voice hoarse from sleep. Naruto moaned incoherently, groping for the pillow but made no other move to get up. Temari heaved herself up laboriously and flopped over onto his bed. "Come up," she ordered, grabbing him in a headlock. Predictably, Naruto squawked and flailed, and she shoved him away before he hit her in the eye. I'm up already," he complained, struggling free of the sheets and sitting up. His eyes were glazed over but open, so Temari rolled off the bed and padded around Hinata to start her own morning routine. Temari would have liked to stay holed up in the guest house with Naruto and Hinata until the crisis was over, but the guest house provided only one meal a day and the majority of their food and emergency supplies had gone with Sai's team, who intended to stay hidden at all costs. She finished the last push-up in the set and collapsed, flopping over onto her back to stare blearily up at the cracked ceiling as she caught her breath. Flashes of Hinata's clothes whirled past her vision as the younger girl moved through her katas at double speed. Behind her, near the door, Naruto's stomach warbled plaintively. Temari cracked a smile, pulling herself back upright. "All right, kids. Let's get some food." "I'm not a kid," Naruto objected, but bounced up eagerly all the same. Hinata relaxed her stance, and let her hands down by her sides. Her chakra pulsed, and the veins around her eyes bulged, crawling to the surface. After a moment, she released her chakra, and her eyes faded to normal. "Niji Nii-san and Sasuke Keikun are still in the B basement across the S street," she reported. Temari hummed. "Good," she said, and tossed Hinata her roll of bandages. Maybe the Nukenin decided he was mistaken. She paused and revised. She wasn't quite that optimistic. Maybe he decided he didn't care, or he's too busy to track down someone who might be his brother. "I don't know. What do you want to eat?" "Ramen," Naruto crowed immediately. Temari resisted the urge to groan. She should have expected that. "Hinata. No, I'm fine with our ramen. Why couldn't they like tofu or something?" She sighed. "Okay. Ramen it is." Naruto cheered, and a small smile spread across Hinata's face as she finished wrapping the bandages around her eyes, so it was almost worth it. "Put your mask on, Naruto," she ordered, and rummaged through her things for her wallet. "Hinata, keep your eyes on, as much as you can." Hi. Naruto bounced down the stairs, Temari and Hinata following at a more sedate pace, and burst out into the town. Mid-morning. The streets already bustled with people, shoppers, and storekeepers and travelers with their wagons full of supplies. Naruto turned left, towards the noodle shop whose basement Niji and Sasuke were hiding in. "Hey!" Temari called, and when he turned, jerked her head in the opposite direction. "Wrong way." Naruto made a face. "That one isn't as good," he complained, but darted off in that direction anyways. Temari tightened her grip on Hinata's hand. "And don't go too far." Hinata's fingers loosened and tightened again, and when Temari glanced over, her lips were trembling. Temari gave a firm squeeze. "Hey, it's okay. We'll be fine," she told the other girl. Hi, Hinata whispered, and followed when she moved to join the crowd. Temari thought the udon ramen soba stand near the town center was pretty decent, but Naruto adamantly insisted that the texture of the ramen was not chewy enough, and the soup was just a little too salty. He'd still take second-rate ramen over any other food, however, and Temari liked some of the side dishes they offered. Distracted, she reacted to Hinata's sudden gasp far too late. She whirled, but an unfamiliar hand landed on her shoulder and yanked. She stumbled, and then she was in an alley. Cardboard and food scraps littered the ground, and the air stank of rotting meat and refuse. She shoved Hinata behind her with one arm and drew a kunai with her other hand, eyes darting back and forth. A second later, Naruto was also deposited bodily into the alley with an indignant yell, and she checked herself before hurled the kunai at his head. "Naruto, get back," she snarled, as a figure loomed from the opposite side. At first glance, he looked entirely unthreatening. He was not particularly tall nor his shoulders especially broad. His face was youthful and still a little round, and his cloak draped on him like it was a little too big. He held no weapons. But when she looked closer, she could see the way he stood with a shinobi's stillness, the calm calculation in his eyes. He'd snatched them off the streets with ease, and she had no doubt he could kill each of them easily if he wished. "Naruto-kun, Hinata-kun," he greeted with a slight nod. "And, Kunoichi-san." He inclined his head at Temari gravely. "I have no plans to hurt you." Temari's lip curled as she tensed even further. "Yeah. It seems rather unsafe for you to be this far in IWA, he continued placidly. "Where is your sensei?" Temari narrowed her eyes and didn't respond. A pause. "I see." He blinked once, deliberately. "I assume the youngest is with her too." "We're not telling you anything." Naruto burst out, sidling up next to Temari to block Hinata from view. "You'll never find out where Sasuke is." Temari gritted her teeth and resisted the urge to stomp on Naruto's foot. "Shut up," she hissed harshly. "I already know where my wayward little brother is," Itachi said dismissively, unmoved by their glares. "What you need is to find somewhere secure. If I found you here, others will be able to as well." "I don't trust you," retorted Naruto shrilly, and for once Temari was glad he'd spoken first. Itachi tipped his head. "That's wise, I suppose. However, you are not safe here. I have not concealed my presence here, and if Konoha doesn't come looking, IWA will." Temari narrowed her eyes. "What do you want with us?" she spat. "Why does it matter to you?" "Sasuke is my little brother," Itachi answered after a pause. "And I do not wish to see any of you fall into Konoha's hands." "Nei-chan," Naruto whispered far too loud to actually hide anything he said. "Is he telling the truth?" Temari summarily ignored him. "How do we know you are not with Konoha?" she demanded. "You haven't even slashed out your Hitai. "My allegiance is pledged to the Hokage, and to Konoha and her citizens," he replied immediately, "but not to the pretender who holds power now." Temari studied his face carefully. She believed him. She let her stance relax, but kept herself between the Nukenin and the two younger children, though if he wanted any of them dead, she knew he could kill them before she'd even blinked. Even so, she flinched back a little, Kunao coming up defensively, when he advanced towards them unhurriedly. "Come, we will need to collect Sasuke and the young Hyuga guardian. All of you need to be moved, protected, and," he glanced back at them, mouth twisting unhappily, "trained." He moved past them on silent feet, back towards the entrance of the alley. "Ayano," Hinata whispered at her back. Temari could feel her trembling. "Are we going with him?" she stuttered. Temari set her shoulders. "Yes," she said firmly, reaching back to twine her hand with the younger girls. "Come on, Naruto." And she strode purposefully after Itachi. At a safe distance, of course. True to his word, Itachi did already know where Sasuke was. He wended unerringly through the crowds to the ramen shop Naruto's favorite and stopped outside the door leading to the basement. Temari gritted her teeth. At her side, Hinata looked apprehensive, and Naruto a combination of belligerent and defensive. "Perhaps you would like to go first," Itachi said, turning to face her. "I realize this is an unusual situation and likely to alarm your friends." "Yeah, sure," said Temari, and herded Naruto and Hinata ahead of her. The door banged shut behind them, leaving them in the dim basement. Boxes and battered bar stools were stacked to the ceiling, illuminated by a single flickering light bulb swaying overhead. At the far end of the room, near the stair leading up into the storefront, Sasuke and Neji were poised like birds before flight. "What's going on?" Sasuke demanded, the quaver in his voice belying his uncertainty. "Why did you lead him here?" Neji sneered, and Temari could feel his glare even through the bandages. "Are you that incompetent that you'd give up our location if he just asks?" "He already knew you were here." Temari snapped. "You were supposed to stay hidden." She was being unfair, she knew, but the adrenaline of the morning was still rushing through her veins, winding her up until she was taut and strained. She could see Neji winding up to spit back a retort, so she forestalled it with her sharpest glare. "Sasuke," she continued relentlessly. "He says he's with the rebels." Do you believe that? Yes, Sasuke answered immediately, hands twisting in the hem of his shirt. He always said he loved Konoha. It's more believable if he became a Nukenin to keep fighting for Konoha instead of for money or something. He won't hurt us. Of course he won't hurt us, Neji muttered caustically. Most of us are worth a small fortune on the black market. He said he'll train us. Naruto interjected. And we can't stay here, anyways. 'Cause there's people chasing him too, and they'll find us when they're looking for him. Neji cast an interrogative glance at Temari. She nodded. He scowled and looked away. We'll go with him, Temari said decisively. But we'll leave the flowers. The flower, oh, said Naruto, realization coming half a beat late. His ability to grasp the subtle side of shinobi life was tenuous at best. Reluctant nods from the other three younger children. Neji's jaw clenched before he gave a sharp nod as well. Temari turned to lead the way back out of the basement, and before he followed, Neji gave the front stairs one last look. Itachi was waiting where they'd left him, standing military straight in the shadows cast by the roof and morning sun. He started towards them as they emerged one by one, and his eyes went straight to Sasuke. Otauto, he greeted warmly, and Temari saw his eyes soften. I'm glad you are safe. Sasuke's eyes darted to the side before meeting his, but he smiled. Hi, Aniki. Itachi reached out a hand, and Neji stiffened, but the older Uchiha merely ruffled Sasuke's hair affectionately, before turning towards the street. Sasuke, who ducked away a little at the touch, looked conflicted between relieved and disappointed. Come, said Itachi. We have been out in the open too long, we will need to regroup before my team arrives. Team. Temari demanded sharply, hand tightening reflexively on Hinata's. The younger girl let out a muffled squeak of protest, and she loosened her grip under Neji's, presumed, glare. Itachi paused, blinking owlishly. Yes. Team. I work closely with others who share my views of Konoha. Temari exchanged glances with Neji. In any case, I cannot effectively protect all of you by myself. We've been doing just fine, Temari muttered. The Nukenin gave her an unexpectedly grave look. You have done admirably. But you should not have had to. Throne, Temari faltered as Itachi turned back to the street. She recovered, sending a narrowed eye glare at his back. He was 3 years older than she was, what right did he have to patronize her? With a quick glance to make sure the others were following, they were, though with varying degrees of reluctance. Temari tugged Hinata towards the storefront. Thank you, Uroshi, Itachi was saying as Temari rounded the corner to find him talking to a wolf. Or maybe a dog. It panted up at him agreeably, then swung its head around to eye the children with an uncannily intelligent stare. A quiet intake of breath. Temari glanced over her shoulder. Naruto had stopped, staring at the dog with a faintly bemused expression. Before she could ask what was wrong, and before she could tell him not to pet strange dogs, honestly, everyone knew that. He tilted his head thoughtfully and walked up to peer at it more closely. Hi, he said. The dog poked its nose in his face, and Naruto giggled a little, hands coming up automatically to push it away. This is Uroshi, Itachi introduced. He has agreed to help me keep watch. Temari eyed the dog dubiously. It was a Ninken, it must be, so was it Itachi's? Could it speak? In the meantime, he continued, pulling Temari out of her thoughts, perhaps you would like to return to the hostel to collect your things. He paused. I don't believe I caught your name. It's Riku, Temari said shortly before one of the others could answer for her. Naruto, absorbed in petting the dog, barely heard which was good, because the others were all good enough liars not to give her away. Naruto, come on. She just angled her hand gently from Hinata's, placing it gently on Neji's shoulder, and dragged Naruto with her back across the street to the hostel. The others didn't follow, but Uroshi the dog patted at their heels, tongue lolling agreeably. Hi, Baa-chan. Temari called in as she and Naruto entered. The dog didn't follow them in, instead sprawling in front and to the side of the door. Oh, hello, dear, the Baa-chan beamed, snaggletooth, appearing in the kitchen doorway. What are you up to? Where's that sister of yours? Ah, our cousin came to get us. Temari lied, smiling widely. He's keeping her company for a bit while we grab our stuff. Leaving so soon? She held up a wizened hand. Wait right there. I'll pack you some food for the trip. Baa-chan, you don't need to, Temari protested half-heartedly. When at last she and Naruto straggled out the door of the hostel, back to the ramen stand, a disgruntled Sasuke was scowling, holding hands with both Hyuga. Niji was glowering ferociously, clearly displeased with his participation in the human chain, and Hinata just looked uncomfortable. Itachi stood back a pace, his face serene, holding a large bag of ramen takeout in each hand. Temari fought the sudden urge to laugh at the sight. Itachi's motel was neither shabby nor opulent, it reminded her of the shinobi himself, efficient and straightforward. A murmured conversation with the desk clerk got them a large room with a low couch and 2 beds. Once in the room, Niji dropped Sasuke's hand as if it burned him and pulled the bandages around his eyes down to hang loosely around his neck. Temari scowled at him, but he shrugged. He knows who we are already, Riku, he said pointedly. They both turned to look at the Nukenin, who for all appearances was ignoring them as he sat cross-legged on the floor, setting out the ramen. Naruto, lured in like a cat by the smell, crept up to sit across from him, and Sasuke settled somewhat apprehensively at his elbow. Hinata hadn't moved from the door, though she'd closed it behind her, and she was fidgeting with the bandages she'd unraveled. Come eat, Hinata-sama, Niji said imperiously, moving to sit more or less as far from Itachi as he possibly could while still being a part of the little circle. Hinata's lips whitened, but she moved almost automatically to his side. It was quite possibly the most uncomfortable meal she'd experienced, and that was including family meals back in Suna. Niji almost pointedly activated his Byakugan to examine the ramen, and took a few bites of Hinata's before he would allow her to eat it. Sasuke, seemingly alternating between jittery and silently imploring Itachi to notice him, picked at his food with little enthusiasm. Naruto, on the other hand, dug in with his usual appalling lack of manners. Temari liked to think she was above all that. She ate at a reasonable pace without slurping or checking for poison, really. If he wanted to he could have done it long ago, and kept her movements controlled and deliberate. So, Riku-san, Itachi said after a moment. He'd eaten more than Sasuke, but not as much as Naruto. Did your sensei mention where she might be going? Temari felt herself stiffen. Beside her, Niji's chopsticks paused on their way to his takeout container. Ah. Never mind, Itachi amended. I am not using you for information. We will find a way to contact her soon enough. Temari's eyes met with Niji's. Itachi sighed and put down his chopsticks. My team wanted to request her assistance in our efforts, but she had gone to ground soon after the Sandame's assassination, and we could not find her. I mean her no harm. Truly. An awkward pause. So, Naruto broke the silence, fidgeting with his chopsticks now that his own ramen was gone. Sasuke said you were Umbu. I was, Itachi allowed. I was promoted to captain a year before the coup. Temari's eyes widened despite herself, and Naruto blurted, what? Weren't you like, 10? Sasuke's arm twitched like he wanted to slap the blonde, but didn't want to act out in front of his brother. 13, corrected Itachi. I was recruited when I was 11, soon after my promotion to Chunin. Wow, that is so cool. You must be, like, super strong. Naruto enthused, and this time Sasuke did punch him in the arm. Keep it down, idiot, you'll get us all killed, he hissed, mirroring Hinata's reflexive glance at the window. Temari mechanically forced herself to take another bite of her ramen and wondered if she'd been too reckless. The evening was uneasy, with Temari and Hinata sharing one bed and Sasuke, Naruto, and Niji crammed on the other. Silently, she glanced over at Niji and raised both eyebrows. He gave a tiny nod in response. They would take turns with the watch that night. If Itachi was aware of it, he made no comment. It was Temari who was awake in the early hours of the morning when it happened. Itachi, who had been awake and cross-legged on the couch for a little over an hour staring absently out the window, stiffened and rose in one smooth movement. He hadn't been expressive before, but the hint of warmth he'd begun to display earlier when they'd been awake wiped off his face abruptly, leaving behind a smooth mask. Alarmed, Temari tensed, watching through slitted eyes as he strode to the door. Her arm shot out across the gap between beds, shaking Niji gently. He came awake instantly, narrowed eyes focused immediately first on her face, then at the door Itaka opened. She heard almost inaudible scuff as Itaka stood back to let someone in, and she itched to turn to see who it was. Niji's eyes widened slightly before closing. Temari quickly closed hers as well. The door clicked shut. "Teiko," Itaka greeted softly, stiff and formal. A long silence yawned. "It's them. You really found the lost four." The new voice is deep, contemplative. "3 of them," said Itaka. "I believe Nico still has the youngest." The other man hummed in acknowledgement. "Any injuries?" "They are all almost certainly undernourished," Itaka said. "But they have no physical injuries that I could tell." "That's easily fixed." Another pause. "And the others?" "Perhaps we could ask them," Itaka said pointedly, and Temari felt a thrill of fear down her spine despite herself. In front of her, Niji's breath continued, deep and slow. "Niji-san, Riku-san." "Otauto," Itaka prompted mildly. Temari opened her eyes, face darkening in a scowl mirrored on Niji's face as they both sat up. On Niji's other side, Suzuki glowered as he scooted back to the headboard. The newcomer was at least 10 centimeters taller than Itaka, and he too stood military straight in an incongruous cloak thrown over battered Konoha gear. From first glance, even with his chakra signature muted, Temari knew he was dangerous. The stillness he carried himself with, the way Itaka deferred to him, the assessing stare. He wore a bandana over his hair and his hitayate crooked over one eye, and Temari's breath stuttered as recognition hit. Sharinan no Kakashi, the Kopinen. He'd been in Suna's bingo book since his promotion to Jounin at the age of 11. She stared back defiantly as he turned his visible eye on her. What is the Sandaime Kazekage heir doing in IWA with the missing heirs of Konoha's biggest clans? Temari froze under the weight of his unrelenting stare, heart pounding. By herself, she knew she was unremarkable, unrecognizable, especially as she looked now. Nobody outside Kaze no Kuni should recognize her without seeing her with the more distinctive Gaara. And with the implications of who she was and who the others were. "Temari is important for our survival," Niji jumped to her defense unexpectedly, interrupting her racing thoughts. "She has done nothing but protect the children." "She takes care of us," Suzuki chimed in, miraculously resisting the urge to yell at Niji for calling him a child when he himself was only a year older. A pregnant pause. Haytake blinked then, the implicit threat vanishing. "I'll have to hear this story later," he said, heavy with promise. "Do you prefer we continue to refer to you as Riku-san?" Itaki inquired. Temari scowled again. "Temari's fine," she grumbled. "Wake those two and pack your things," Haytake said abruptly. "We need to collect the others and go." "The others?" Niji asked, almost too calmly. "It would be unstrategic to leave 3 children, particularly a Jinhiriki, in enemy territory," he responded offhandedly, and Temari grimaced. "If you would come with me, Temari-san, we'll rendezvous outside the village." Niji gave her an inquisitive stare, and she gave a tiny nod, resigned. "Be careful," he said, as she leaned out of bed and slipped into her sandals. "Take care of them," she returned, grabbing her untouched pack from the floor, and followed Kakashi to the door. "I'll come with you," Suzuki interjected suddenly, and everybody swung around in surprise. Temari's mouth quirked in an involuntary grin when he glared suspiciously at Haytake. Suzuki Itaka began, but the younger Uchiha had already grabbed his pack. I'll see you later, Aniki," he said stubbornly, tilting his chin up to better stare down Haytake. "Come quietly," was all Haytake said, before nodding at Itaki and sweeping out the door. The Ninkin from before was waiting outside in the dim glow of the pre-dawn. His tail thumped welcomingly against the ground. "The other children, Urushi," Haytake said, and the wolfish hound was up and trotting down the street. Temari scowled at the dogs retreating back, a little betrayed. She and Suzuki had to jog to keep up with Haytake's long strides, and the shinobi showed no signs of slowing down to accommodate them. He seemed assured that they would follow him, and that rankled a little. Itaki had seemed genuine, though, and as intimidating as he was, Haytake appeared to be an ally as well. Between her, Gaara, Suzuki, Hinata, and Naruto, she knew they were valuable, and even if Itachi and Hatake did see them just as chess pieces, they would at least protect them from the Konoha and Suna shinobi hunting them. With the combined strength of two shinobi who had been in the ranks of Konoha's elite since they were younger than she was now, Temari believed they could keep all of who she had begun to consider her kids safe. It would be nice, she thought wistfully, to be able to live without constant fear of discovery, always on the run until they became strong enough to defend themselves. She glanced to the side where Sasuke trotted, pack bouncing on his back. He met her eyes with a determined set to his eyes, and her mouth quirked in a lopsided smile as she felt a sudden rush of affection. Sasuke had his brother back. They could get Itachi and Hatake to train them to get stronger, faster. They would finally be able to fight back instead of running and hiding. It wouldn't be just Temari, trying to keep the kids warm and fed and safe. She sighed wryly. The downside of more people. Gaara would not be happy with this. Chapter 3, Shisui says shit more in this chapter than I've said in my entire life. Mission Report, D5. 0500 hours all clear not received. Initiated Phase 3 of Protocol 73I. End report. Operative Cat 15. High in the boughs of a tree that towered over its neighbors, and with the pointed muzzle of a hound resting on his thigh, Shisui watched the sunset in a blaze of golden hues. He rubbed his thumb over Gurako's forehead absently in the Ninken's rare moment of stillness as the wind ruffled the dark tangles of curls flopping over Shisui's Hitai. Shisui sank into the calm. Here, above the ground, above the endless futile struggles, he could let himself believe nothing else mattered. He could be content with a fleeting moment of peace hundreds of miles from home, watching the sunset. Gurako finally shifted, leaning over to shove a damp, cold nose into Shisui's hand. Shisui flinched away, and realized the dying rays of the sun had long since vanished behind the horizon. The only light now was from the distant pinpricks of stars, and the smoldering remains of the fire below him. He scruffed a hand over Gurako's ears apologetically. Sorry, he said wryly. You hungry? The hound yipped and bounded up in a flash, darting back and forth with little pounces and a madly wagging tail that drew a smile to Shisui's face. Lead the way, said Shisui, and the Ninken vanished down the tree in a flurry of rustling foliage. Shisui dropped out of the tree lightly, landing in an easy crouch. At the mouth of the cave, Gurako was enthusiastically washing Haku's face. The younger shinobi's eyes were closed as he bemusedly and patiently tolerated the Ninken's greeting. Hey, Haku, said Shisui, amused. Got anything for Gurako, here? Says he's hungry. Give him some room, Gurako. I don't believe we have leftovers from dinner, Shisui-san, Haku managed, as Gurako reluctantly backed up a couple steps. But perhaps I could find some dried meat. Gurako's tail thumped the ground eagerly. This is why Teiko thinks you're spoiled, Shisui scolded half-heartedly, even as Haku dug through their travel packs. We keep feeding you and you'll get fat. You'll have to roll after your prey. Gurako panted up at them shamelessly, making little leaps across the width of the cave. Shisui crossed his arms even as he watched the Ninken fondly. As the youngest of Hatake's hounds, Gurako was much more likely to indulge in puppy-like displays of exuberance. Further in the shadows of the cave, Uroshi stared at the other Ninken long-sufferingly. Looking forward to Kusa, Shisui asked Haku as the younger tossed a piece of jerky to the Ninken. It will be nice to leave camp for a little, Haku admitted, sinking down gracefully next to Gurako. Zabuza-san mentioned that a new Oden stand opened in Kasai, the border town, and I'd love to try it. Oof, Oden, Shisui said wistfully. You better bring some back for me. Haku wrinkled his nose delicately. I'm not sure you'll want 2-day-old Oden, Shisui-san. Shisui made a face. You're right, he agreed reluctantly. Better not risk that. How about a pet? If you get me a bird, I bet I could train it to screech every time Zabuza curses. The corner of Haku's mouth twitched in a stifled smile. Konoha. Shisui turned to see the hulking swordsman stalk out of the trees, rivulets of water trailing along the raised Y incision scar on the man's bare torso and dripping onto his rapidly dampening pants. Shisui raised an eyebrow. Wow, Z, you ever heard of a towel? Stop corrupting my apprentice, Zabuza growled, jabbing a finger at Shisui. And you don't even think about it. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Zabuza-san, said Haku, completely straight-faced. I mean it, kid, Zabuza warned as he clumped past. Any bird you bring back will be roasted. And eaten. Haku frowned regretfully. Well, maybe a rabbit, Shisui suggested cheerfully. No, said Zabuza from the back of the cave, voice muffled as he shrugged into one of his black sleeveless shirts. A cat, said Shisui. You better be okay with cats, Z, you don't have a problem with any of the hounds. The swordsman glanced askance at the two Ninken very carefully, not paying attention to their conversation. That's different, he muttered. They're not food. Guriko's tail thumped encouragingly. Low bar, but hey, this was Zabuza. Practically a declaration of love. Did you put warding seals up? Zabuza asked, nodding his head vaguely in the direction of the forest as he wandered back towards Shisui and Haku. Didn't see any just now. Shisui grimaced. No, we're running low. I figured I should keep the ones we still have for when I'm the only one here. Ah, afraid of being all by yourself in the scary forest. Zabuza mocked lightly. Aren't you supposed to be a big, strong shinobi, Konoha? Shisui snorted. I'm not the one bringing an 11-year-old to watch his back, asshole. Nearly 12, Haku interjected helpfully. I'm training him, Zabuza grumbled, ignoring his apprentice. It's an investment. Whatever lets you sleep at night, Z, said Shisui, trading an amused glance with Haku. Zabuza sniffed. Give us a light, Konoha, he said, in a valiant and rare attempt to be the adult in the conversation. May as well make us a target. Shisui spat a tongue of flame at the pile of charred wood obligingly. On your head, if the combined forces of Konoha and IWA descend on us here, he warned. I'm not going to be the one who tells hey take Taika who got his nice new base wrecked. At least we'll get some action. Zabuza flicked a stick onto the burgeoning fire. Shisui eyed him sympathetically. You know, you could just ask Taika for another kind of mission. Zabuza snorted. Is that what you do? Shisui hesitated. No, he admitted ruefully. I take what's given to me and am grateful for it. But that's different, he reproached. Zabuza shrugged one shoulder dismissively. Pretty sure you're ready for the field, Konoha. Said Shisui noncommittally. He stared pensively at the flame dancing merrily between them, and his hands twitched as he forced them to stay unclenched. I'd be fine with you watching my back, I guess, Zabuza offered gruffly, glaring at the fire as well to avoid making eye contact. I as well, Shisui-san, Haku chimed in much more warmly. Ah, said Shisui, torn between feeling touched and mercilessly mocking the Mist-nin because feelings. Zabuza rolled his eyes. Don't make it weird, Konoha. Shisui gave in to the overwhelming temptation. Come on, Z, I thought we had a connection, he wheedled, widening his eye innocently. I know you care. You love me. Okay, Shisui reflected, as he ducked the pair of shuriken that whistled over his head, maybe he had a habit of pushing the man's self-restraint. And maybe it wasn't the healthiest hobby. Perhaps you should avoid damaging the base, Zabuza-san, suggested Haku serenely as Shisui flickered out of the way of a second volley. Oi, protested Shisui indignantly. And Shisui-san, Haku added dutifully. Zabuza reluctantly replaced a handful of shuriken in his holster. Keep your sentimental leaf bullshit out of this, he growled. I can't help it, it's in my nature, Shisui insisted with a straight face. The urge to emote, it's just so strong. Shut up, Zabuza snarled, hand twitching towards Kubikari Basho. Behind him, Haku raised his eyebrows subtly. Shisui manfully shoved down the urge to needle the swordsman further. See, Haku? He did too have a survival instinct. He paused. I just feel and he fled into the forest outside as Zabuza charged after him, blade held aloft. Okay, so maybe he didn't. Sometimes, Shisui wondered when he would stop running. In battle, from his battles, from every shitty thing that ever happened to him. After Konoha was theirs again, he'd told himself. Until he was home. But he already knew that was a lie. Shisui would run until the day he died. Go back to sleep, Haku, Shisui said without turning around. The younger shinobi ignored him, scooping Guriko's head into his lap as he settled beside Shisui against the wall of the cave. The forest outside was pitch black, the only light was the still smoldering fire Shisui had allowed to dwindle. It is unfair that you should watch the entire night through when there are 3 of us, Haku murmured, running light fingers over the sleeping Ninken's ears. Shisui shrugged. I'm going to be up anyways. Makes no sense that more than one of us needs to be awake. He glanced at the younger shinobi and reached over to rub at the furrow that appeared between Haku's brows. Hey, cut that out. It's fine. You need your rest as well, Haku insisted, by far too polite to slap Shisui's hand away. You need it more, Shisui retorted, taking his hand back anyways. You're the one going to Kusa. You won't have an extra man in the watch rotation after traveling the whole day with just the 2 of you, may as well take advantage of it while you can. Haku was a good shinobi kid. Shisui eyed him, amused, as the boy's eyes hooded involuntarily. You can keep me company as long as you sleep, he offered magnanimously. That does not sound fair, said Haku reproachfully, the frown reappearing. I'll tell Zabuza you stayed up training and wore yourself out, threatened Shisui, even though he told you to sleep. Haku's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't. That's a lie. Sleep, kid, said Shisui smugly. I'm a shinobi. Shinobi lie. Haku accepted his defeat in silence with far more grace than either Shisui or Zabuza would have, leaning back against the rock. The hound in his lap shifted, reaching both front legs up to cover more of Haku. A drowsy Uhei dragged himself over as well, folding in long limbs to curl up with his back against the youngest shinobi. By the time Zabuza clumped out, the sky was just a few shades lighter than pitch black, and Haku had slid down until his head was pillowed on Uhei's side. The swordsman stopped and stared at his apprentice, something nearing a grudging affection and disapproval warring on his face to produce a strange half-grimace like he'd bitten into a lemon only to find it sickly sweet instead of sour. Shisui watched with some amusement out of the corner of his eye until Haku stirred and Zabuza promptly wiped the expression off his face. Get up, he growled, prodding at his apprentice with a sandal. Uhei opened one eye balefully but didn't otherwise move. Haku, on the other hand, shot bolt upright, jostling Guriko, who yelped his disapproval before scuttling over to Shisui instead. Haku blinked rapidly. I'm ready, he said, staggering to his feet. Good morning, Shisui said cheerfully, unfazed by the long night. He stretched his legs out and felt the joints pop satisfyingly. Sleep well. Zabuza glared at him, eyes just on the side of bleary. Zabuza was very much not a morning person. Yes, thank you, Shisui-san, said Haku, because someone had learned their manners as a kid. As a younger kid, still being a kid. Don't die while we're gone, Zabuza ordered Shisui, as Haku slung a pack over his shoulder. I don't want to clean up that fucking mess. Shisui watched the urge to make a quip about the swordsman carrying sail past just a little regretfully. That could only end bloody. Yeah, same to you, he said instead. I'd hate to have to make Haku drag your corpse across half the country. Zabuza grunted. Haku waved, and they were gone, leaving Shisui alone. Well, Shisui regarded the slumbering bodies around him wryly, alone except for the captain's Ninken. He hauled himself up and blinked the dryness out of his eye. May as well put the seals up and take a nap until the sun actually rose. Shisui awoke, blinking blindly in the darkness, shivering uncontrollably as his muscles remembered the burn of the drugs. He sat up, prying off the fingers clutching his Tonto's hilt in a dead man's grip. Numbly, he shifted backwards until his back hit the wall. Taki no Kuni, he muttered, deliberately spacing his breaths. Late autumn. It rained yesterday. Inhale, exhale. I saw Itake. Taki no Kuni. He half grinned, half grimaced bitterly, staring at his trembling hands and willing them to stop shaking. Late autumn. It rained yesterday. 16 months later, and the sun-in still had a hold on him. He strapped on his kunao holster and slid his Tonto into its harness, hauling himself upright. He didn't know if training was a healthy coping mechanism, but hey, it worked, kind of, so it was good enough for him. Shisui rounded the corner to the mouth of the cave, sidestepping puddles, and sprawled out Ninken. Only Akino, Uroshi, and Guriko were here now. It wasn't unusual for Heitake's Ninken to take off into the surrounding forest by themselves overnight or even wander off in the middle of the day, but they didn't tend to go far. Guriko whoofed a greeting, craning his neck up to snuffle at his hand, and though Akino merely stared regally, Uroshi's tail thumped against the ground in welcome. "Good morning," said Shisui, summoning up his usual cheer as he scratched Guriko's ears. "I'm just going to go train for a bit, no need to follow me." Uroshi's tail stilled. Oh, gods. Heitake's Ninken could be oddly clingy, and Shisui did not want to get glared at for making his hounds sulk. "Maybe we can go for a hunt when I get back," he tried, and Uroshi gave him a wolfish grin as his tail resumed its rhythmic beat. Crisis averted. He gave Guriko one last pat when the hound shoved his cold nose into his hand and strode out through the brush. The rain had passed, but the sky was still blanketed in clouds and moisture hung in the air. Murky puddles were scattered on the ground, and where there wasn't standing water, there was mud. Shisui walked lightly atop both, then picked up his pace to a brisk run, then a headlong sprint before he was hurtling between trees, wind whipping through his unruly hair. He had been on the battlefield since he was 7, seen bloodshed and spilled blood for the first time in the same year. He had never physically been the strongest on the battlefield even as a child, he'd only had his speed to keep him alive, to excel. Reluctantly, he slowed as he reached his destination. This copse was no different than the surrounding trees, but had been his preferred training location since they'd established their base camp in Taki no Kuni. He'd carved tiny marks into the bark when he first came, but he'd trained here so many times the numbers were all but obliterated by deep scores from his blades. It was fine. He'd long since memorized the order. Today was a backwards by threes day, Shisui decided, hopping up onto the trunk of number 50 and casting a considering eye at 47. He gathered his chakra, coiled in him like a snake. He drew a kunao, spinning it absently, slashed the bark in one quick strike and moved. A thrill of exhilaration shot through him. This was speed. This was living. He landed, already pivoted to rebound, and pounced for the next mark. His focus narrowed to his body, his target, his breath rasping harshly in his chest. The trees whipped past in blurs as he pushed himself harder, faster, twisting his body to avoid the reaching branches. Land, slash, turn. Shisui felt his chakra crackle as he threw himself into one shunshin, then the next, and the next. All around him, leaves and tiny twigs rained down from the force of the winds blown by his passing. Mid-shunshin, his focus wavered when he suddenly realized he'd misjudged the distance to the next target. He twisted desperately and only just managed to clip the side of the trunk with side of his chest, knocking the breath out of him and sending into an uncontrolled tumble instead of a head-on collision with the tree. He threw himself to the right to avoid a bush and skidded to a stop on his side. He rolled onto his back. For a moment, he lay panting, a sudden frustrated rage bubbling up in his chest. That wouldn't have happened if he still had both eyes. But as soon as it came, it vanished, leaving him hollow and indifferent in the mud. He dragged a grimy hand down his face. "Damn," he muttered aloud, without feeling. He picked himself up, brushing off the thickest of the dirt caked on his clothes, then turned to face the trees again. He sank into a crouch, raising his kunao back into a ready position. Deep breath in, out. He sprang. The first sign something was up was the Ninken. From his upside-down position, balancing on one hand, he saw all three dogs' heads go up, ears pricked. Akino rolled to his feet without even shaking out his fur, Guriko and wolfish Uroshi arrayed behind him. Shisui came down from his handstand, moving against the cave wall and dropping a hand towards his kunao holster. "Is it an enemy?" he asked in an undertone. Guriko swung his head around and blinked deliberately before turning back around, head tilted towards the entrance. Reassured but still cautious, Shisui leaned against the wall, watching the Ninken watch the forest. Eventually he heard what they could running paw steps, Featherlight and then the smallish shepherd mix that had left with Itaka some 2 days ago leapt into the cave. "Shiba," Shisui said in surprise. The Ninken had clearly been running hard for a long time. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, and even as he stood at a halt, his legs trembled. Guriko and Uroshi surged around Akino to nose at the new arrival, hoofing concernedly at his sides. Akino growled something, clearly interrogative, and Shiba responded. Shisui sighed through his nose and went to grab some water and meat from the deer he'd taken down the day before for Shiba from the back. Kakashi's hounds only talked human speech to Kakashi, or when they thought nobody would overhear, and he doubted that would change now. There was a high-pitched yelp, sounds of a scuffle, and Shisui turned in time to see Akino snap his jaws at Guriko, who reared back before grumbling a growl and sprinting from the cave in a whirl of long limbs. "Hey!" Shisui called after him. The three remaining hounds swung around to look at him. "Where's he going?" The Ninken exchanged glances, and Akino rumbled a little and bumped his muzzle into Uroshi's shoulder. Uroshi gave Shisui a kind of apologetic, toothy grin and loped out of the cave as well. "They're Ninken," Shisui thought, "they can make their own decisions." And then, Kakashi probably gave them orders too. He never said they have to stay in the cave. And he hoped it was true, because he really didn't want the captain holding him responsible for his hounds running off to who knows where. "I hope you know what you're doing," he told Akino, ambling over to sink down next to the two Ninken. Akino shot him the frostiest, most offended blue-eyed glare he'd ever seen from a dog. "Unbelievable." "Just kidding." Shisui faked a smile, to which the Ninken sniffed and turned away, and set down the food and water for Shiba. Shisui liked Shiba better. Shiba was friendly. Shiba sprawled with his back against Shisui's lap as his legs folded involuntarily, paying no attention to the food or water as he let his head thump to the floor. "Hey, no," Shisui admonished, and reached out to grab the dog's forelegs gently, slowly extending and folding them in turn. "You can't just lay down after running, you'll cramp up." Shiba rolled his head around and gave him a happy grin, not even attempting to move since Shisui was doing all the stretching for him. At his side, Akino let out a disgusted huff. "He's right, you're spoiled," he told Shiba, smoothing his fingers against the short fur on the Ninken's legs. Akino twitched. Shisui nudged the smaller Ninken with his knee. "Come on, Shiba, eat something," he prompted. "You must be hungry." Shiba lolled his head dramatically in the direction of the bowl of meat, snapping his jaws pitifully. Akino bared his teeth. Shisui rolled his eyes. "Stop being such a brat," he groused, but leaned over anyways to scoot the meat closer. Haytake was right. His hounds were going soft, and it was probably because Shisui kept coddling them. He reached out to cart a hand through Shiba's fur. He stared out into the forest. There wasn't much to do at base camp besides train, make sure nobody found him, and keep supplies stocked. Being the invalid of the team sucked. "When will my husband return from war?" he sing-songed sardonically. Ouch. He snatched his hand back from Shiba's warning nip and met the Ninken's reproachful stare indignantly. Shisui's mouth quirked in a lopsided grin. "Too depressing?" "Sorry." He ruffled the hound's ears. Shiba stared for another second and went back to eating. At the edge of his vision, he saw Akino roll his eyes. "Hey, I saw that," Shisui snapped half-heartedly, and was summarily ignored. He leaned back absently. "Hey, Akino." The Ninken's ears swiveled in his direction. "Where do Hay and Bull go? Are they on a mission?" Akino swung his head around to rest on his paws and regarded him unwaveringly. "Okay. Are they still in Taki no Kuni?" Slowly, the hound blinked. Shisui liked to think he and Akino had a special kind of connection. They even had a special code to communicate, where Shisui asked a polar question and Akino answered with a withering stare that meant yes or an "are you dumb" blink that meant no. "Is it a surveillance mission?" Stare. "Are they coming straight back here?" Stare. "In the next day?" Blink. Communicating with Akino could be a little tiring. "Okay, what happened with Itaka's mission?" Shiba's tail thumped a little at the mention of Itaka's name as he gnawed a meaty bone, the last remains of his meal, but otherwise ignored the exchange. "Is he coming back?" Akino blinked. Shisui hesitated. "Ever?" Akino gave him a particularly scathing look. "Dumb question," Shisui admitted, hiding his amusement. He gave up. He suspected Akino liked being obstinate, and if it were really urgent, Itaka would have sent a written message. He sighed. "I'm going to get some more firewood," he said, and carefully shifted Shiba so he could get up without disturbing the Ninken too much. Unsurprisingly, Shiba grumbled anyways. A couple hours later, over a dinner of venison, stewed for Shisui and extra bloody rare for the hounds, Shiba vanished mid-bite in a puff of smoke. Shisui flinched hard enough to drop his bowl, but caught it before any of its contents spilled. Across the fire, Akino rose unhurriedly and bit his paw. The Ninken's chakra surged, and Heitake appeared in a crouch amid the smoky residue of the summoning. With the warning, Shisui only twitched. "Teiku," he greeted, as the older man rose. Shisui glanced at Akino, standing alert at Heitake's side, and Heitake's own intent expression. What happened? Whatever had happened on Ataka's mission must have been urgent after all, for Kakashi to cut his own trip short. Heitake cast a cursory glance over the cave. Shisui hoped he wasn't looking for the other Ninken. Itaka found the lost four in Ashina, Heitake said without preamble. Pack everything up and clear the site. Shisui blinked. What? Hi, he said faintly, on autopilot, glancing back towards the scattered equipment further in the caves. When he turned back around, Heitake had summoned back Guriko, who lay panting in a tangle of limbs on the cave floor. Shisui turned a disapproving frown on Heitake, who looked at least a little apologetic. I'll be going straight to Ashino to help Itaki and move the four out of IWA, said Heitake, already facing out towards the visible sunset. I sent Baisuke to recall Zabuza and Haku. As soon as they get back here, meet us on the way. Pursuit is probable, we will need backup. Where are we taking them? Shisui asked, fumbling another trencher out of the bag for Heitake. Heitake hesitated slightly. Tetsu no Kuni, he admitted. Shisui's eyes widened. Iron? Isn't that kind of risky? We have a deep cover operative there, said Heitake. And it's more important that we get the four somewhere safe, even if it means compromising our agent or risking violating Tetsu's neutrality. He caught the trencher Shisui tossed him and helped himself to the stew, though he remained standing and poised to retreat back out into the forest. Shisui hesitated. Is Suzuki? Heitake cut his eye over to Shisui and nodded once. He's there. He's fine. He tossed the empty trencher to Akino, who caught it with a snap of his jaws. Shisui let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. There are some unknowns there as well, the other man added vaguely. The situation will become complicated quickly unless we move fast. I'll come with you. Zabuza and Haku can. No, Heitake interrupted. Shisui snapped his mouth shut. We'll be more conspicuous if we go together, by all accounts there's been too much activity in the village already. Wipe the area and meet us en route. Hi, Shisui acquiesced reluctantly. Heitake looked up and met his eyes. Don't take too long, he warned, and in a swirl of his cloak, leapt out into the forest. The significance of the news didn't really register to Shisui until after Kakashi had left. The Lost Four. 2 years after the fall, and nobody had known where the heirs had gone, or who, if anyone, had them. And they'd been in IWA. Shit, he breathed, and half laughed. Not kidnapped. Not dead. Not collared in Konoha as bargaining chips or brainwashed soldiers. The four. That was a pretty big damn thing to leave out, he said to Akino pointedly. The big dog's ears flicked back, lips peeling back from his teeth just a bit in a sneer. You didn't ask, the Ninken's stare retorted insolently. Shisui rolled his eye so hard it hurt. Unbelievable, he muttered, and went to get a bowl of water for Guriko. Zabuza blew in with Haku and Baisuke at his heels the next day a few minutes after Shisui finished taking down the last of the secrecy seals around the perimeter of their camp. Hey, Konoha, the swordsman greeted. Haku smiled weakly behind him, swaying a little on his feet. What's this about? He tossed a scroll at Shisui. Shisui caught it, unfurling it with one hand and gesturing absently at the pot of stew with his other hand, the only sign of their camp remaining. Urgent. Abort mission. New objective. Butterfly. It wasn't signed. Shisui rolled his eye. If I'd known he was going to make me tell you what's going on, I would have gotten him to give me a better explanation. Zabuza raised an eyebrow, shoving a trencher of stew at Haku, who took it gratefully and slid down against the wall. Itaka found the lost four in Iwa. Village of Ashino, said Shisui. Zabuza didn't blink, emptying the pot into another trencher. The what? Shisui rolled the scroll shut, regarding him with an incredulous stare. The lost four? The four kids that went missing from Konoha the night the Sandaime was assassinated. Zabuza shrugged. Don't kids go missing all the time? Well, yeah, Shisui admitted. But these kids are the second son of the Uchiha clan head, the first and second daughters of the Hyuga clan head, and the Kyuubigen hierarchy. Both eyebrows went up. Oh, shit, said Zabuza. Oh yeah, I probably wasn't supposed to tell you that last part, added Shisui belatedly. Why don't you know about them? Apparently it was a big thing in the covert intelligence community. Everybody knew about them. Despite all the cover UPS went unsaid. Zabuza rolled his eyes. I was busy trying to off the Mizukage. And then getting sliced and diced by that creepy snake fucker. Oh. Right. Real smooth, Shisui. Bring up everyone's unresolved trauma, why don't you? For a while everyone though Kumo had them, since that sort of thing's right up their alley, and they are kind of at war with Konoha, but nobody could prove it one way or the other. So what are they doing in Iwa? Shisui hummed thoughtfully. There was another theory. When I was in Umbu, there was a protocol in case the walls had been compromised, to get the underage members of the major clan's main branch families to safe points elsewhere in Hinokuni, in case the head was killed. It's a relic from when the village was first founded, it never been used. But it was used that night, and at one of the safe points, the operative in charge of securing the Hyuga girls left mission reports confirming their survival and that of Uchiha Sasuke. The last report suggested she would be taking them into deep cover, outside the country. Everyone thought it was planted, and Danzo really had them, but he shrugged. Maybe not. Zabuza frowned. That's convenient. You're sure it's not a trap? It could be, Shisui admitted. But I don't think Itaka would fall for something like that. Even for his brother. Zabuza's eyes widened. Oh, shit. That's his brother. Damn. Yeah, agreed Shisui. Cute kid. Or he was. So what's the plan? I think the big one is, get them out of Iwa. We're supposed to meet up with them en route to Tetsu. Zabuza squinted at him dubiously. Lots of samurai in Tetsu. Shisui shrugged. Could be safer for a bunch of kids. Supposedly we have a deep cover plant there already. Zabuza was clearly unconvinced. When do we leave? Shisui hesitated, glancing at Haku. The younger boy was clearly exhausted, but struggled upright. I'm ready, he insisted. Zabuza scowled. Nah, not yet, Shisui dismissed. Half an hour. I don't think Baisuke's ready to run again yet. Zabuza eyed the little ninkin in question, curled up next to the fire next to a half-chewed bone. Take a break, Haku, he ordered. You'll need your strength. Haku slumped back against the wall gratefully. Anything else we need, Konoha? Nah, said Shisui, sinking down so he could run a hand over Guriko's short fur. Everything's packed. Unless you need to refill your water or anything. Zabuza swung the broadsword off his back, running a hand over the flat of the blade. He slit his finger on the edge distractedly, and when the blood welled up on his skin, smoothed it into the metal. Man, Shisui said. That's still creepy. It's efficient, Zabuza corrected with a pointy-toothed grin. It'll still be a perfectly good blade when that twig of yours has been sharpened into a needle. Shisui scoffed, offended. My Tonto is fine, thanks very much. It just doesn't need to suck blood like a mosquito. Kurikiribauchu is a mosquito like an ocean is a puddle, Zabuza said loftily. Whereas that pig's ticker is a cup of water. A teacup. If I'm being generous. Oh my gods, I'm not doing this, Shisui groaned. You're comparing our swords. With poetry. It's not even like the size matters, just the skill of the wielder. That's what the guy with the smaller sword always says, Zabuza said smugly, waggling his eyebrows at Shisui suggestively. Shisui picked up the empty pot and threw it at Zabuza's head. The clouds had finally broken up enough to reveal the moon by the time they were ready to leave base camp behind for the last time. Baisuk. Shisui poked the Ninken, who ignored him. Baisuk, get up. Still, the little dog didn't move. Shisui stared around helplessly. Zabuza shrugged. Akino looked supremely unconcerned, while Guriko panted at him cheerfully from the edge of the cave. Nobody's going to carry you, Baisuk, said Shisui, poking the dog again. The top of Baisuk's head bumped against the underside of Shisui's chin with every stride he took. Spoiled rotten, all of you, Shisui muttered at the Ninken tucked down the front of his flak jacket. Baisuk, ostensibly still asleep, didn't even twitch. I'm sure he could have caught up in his own time, Shisui-san, Haku pointed out. He would have gotten eaten, Shisui defended, as if he wasn't aware what the Ninken was capable of. He's, like, one bite for an eagle or badger or something. Konoha, Zabuza said slowly, badgers don't eat dogs. Yeah, but he's the size of a rabbit, argued Shisui. I'd eat him, if I were a badger. Baisuk made an offended grumbling noise. Hush, unless you want to walk yourself, Shisui scolded. The run north was relatively uneventful. Shisui was just glad to be moving again. Staying in the same place, anchored in a relatively insecure area, had made him restless. His lengthy convalescence after his time with Orochimaru had been terrible. Following Akino's lead, Shisui dropped out of the branches down next to Zabuza, and within minutes, caught sight of Hatake. They were just a couple kilometers inside the border. The sun had just fully breached the horizon, giving enough light for a pretty good first sight of the group. Zabuza and Shisui exchanged looks. I thought you said 4, said Zabuza finally. That's what I thought. Shisui responded uncertainly, surveilling the kid on Hatake's back, the 2 girls riding Bull, a boy that had to be Sasuke on Itaka's back, and the 4 other kids arrayed between them. Each of the children regarded the newcomers with deep suspicion. Shisui, Haku, take point. Momoichi, rearguard, and decoys. We need to get into Tetsu by nightfall, Hatake ordered without preamble. Explanations will wait until later. Zabuza grunted. Hi, said Shisui, giving the 8 children another wary glance. Oh, and Shisui, Hatake turned towards him, an inscrutable expression on the sliver of his face that was visible. Hi. Shisui answered warily. Why, said Hatake slowly, is my ferocious warhound cuddling in your shirt? Shisui glanced down, as if he had forgotten the furry lump on his chest. Ask your ferocious warhound, he grumbled, disgruntled. He thought a badger would eat him, Zabuza interjected helpfully. Hatake squinted slowly between the 2 of them before shaking his head and moving away. Thanks for watching out for my precious Ninken, Shisui muttered under his breath as he leapt towards the front of the group. No problem, Teiko, they don't drool as much as you do. One of the kids, the pink-haired girl, choked on a surprised giggle. What was that? Hatake asked mildly from across the clearing, a dangerous gleam in his eye. Your Ninken are delightful, and it's an honor to work with you, sir, Shisui said without missing a beat, and made a hasty retreat into the forest. Nightfall saw them within the forests of Tetsu no Kuni without incident. By that time, Shisui had gained another passenger, a shaggy-haired boy that clung to his neck like a limpet and made no noise whatsoever. Baisuk, meanwhile, made a disgruntled noise and stuck his entire head back into Shisui's flak jacket. Hatake called a halt in a small clearing with towering trees that did little to shield them from the wind whipping through the trunks. Shisui crouched to let the kid off. He stared at Shisui with black-rimmed eyes for about 5 seconds in complete silence before wandering off to where the others huddled at the center of the clearing. Bemused, Shisui watched him go before giving a mental shrug and turning to put up the safety seal outside the perimeter of the camp. With a familiarity born of repetition, Haku unsealed a tent from his storage scroll, while Itaki had already begun collecting fallen branches for a fire. Zabuza had vanished from across the other side of the clearing, presumably to set up traps. Hatake ghosted up to his side as he unfolded a paper seal and pressed it up against the smooth bark of a tree 5 meters from the camp. The children, he said. Shisui pushed his chakra into the seal, and it lit up in a flash of blue. They'll need to be interviewed, Hatake went on. The probability that one is a plant is, Not non-existent. Shisui paused and turned. Where exactly did these unknowns come from? Heitake's eye slid back towards the camp. That redhead you were carrying is the Ichibai Jinhiriki. Shisui did not grab the other man by the collar, but it was a close thing. What? He hissed. Intelligence suggested he kidnapped his sister, the Kazekige's oldest child, and escaped from Tsunagakure, but that clearly doesn't appear to be the case, Heitake continued, as if he hadn't just told Shisui he'd been piggybacking the human personification of an extinction-level event for the better part of the day. What? Shisui's voice came out faintly strangled. Exactly what they're doing here, with the four, remains to be seen, Heitake said almost absently. Deep breath, Shisui. Strangling your commanding officer is not the answer. Arg, said Shisui. The youngest of the four is not here, Heitake ignored Shisui's incoherent sputtering. But I believe the Hyuga boy is a close branch relative. The remaining two are a complete mystery, but the boy moves with some training already. Shisui opened his mouth, then closed it again wordlessly. Interview the girls, Heitake ordered. Find out why they're here. Hi, Shisui barely had time to get out before Heitake was striding away again. Shisui stared at his back, then at the tree in front of him. His life was absolutely ridiculous. He let out a short breath and went to put up the rest of the seals. Shisui stared at the girl. The girl stared at the ground. Shisui cleared his throat. Hi, he said. The girl peeked up at him through dusty pink bangs and said nothing. I'm Shisui, he soldiered on valiantly. What's your name? Sakura, she mumbled, training her eyes back on the ground. That's a pretty name, Shisui offered. Can I call you Sakura-chan? The girl scuffed at the dirt with one sandal and nodded mutely. So, Sakura, where are you from? Konohagakure no Sato in Hai no Kuni, she answered after a pause. Shisui crossed an item off his mental list. Konoha, huh? Why'd you leave? The little girl fidgeted. Me and Tio-san went to Kanazawa cause he needed acorn flour, she told the dirt. But the ninja came at night and Tio-san told me to get under the wagon and then he fell and he wouldn't move and he was bleeding a lot. She looked up at Shisui with solemn eyes. He's dead, she told him, matter of fact. Shisui swallowed. I'm sorry, Sakura-chan. Sakura looked back down. Then what happened? Shisui prompted after a long pause. Naruto got under the wagon too, she said, swinging her feet back and forth. The ninja were chasing him but the dog mask fought them off but they hurt him too. Dog mask told Sai to take us somewhere safe so we ran. Sai knew where the secret hiding place was. She spoke like a war survivor, numb and detached. Who's Sai? Asked Shisui automatically, brushing the stray thoughts away. A small smile appeared on her face. Sai is weird, she told him. He had a mask, too, like the dog mask, except with a mouse face on it. Umbu trainee, then. He helps Temari take care of us. Temari the Kazekige's daughter. Is Temari nice to you? Shisui asked. Sakura nodded. She tells us where to find food and how to cook and ninja stuff. Survival 101 Academy students would have a good grasp on this by their third year. Is she strong? He prompted. Yeah. She knows lots of cool stuff and she's good at taijutsu and she taught us wall walking. Wall walking Temari had to be genin level, at least. How did you meet Temari? The girl fussed with the edge of her shirt. Nico-sensei took us to a new village and Naruto met Gaara in the market and took him back with him. Temari's his sister so she came too. Shisui nodded encouragingly. Right. So, what do you think about Gaara? Sakura paused noticeably. He's strong, she said. Shisui narrowed his eyes. Does he scare you? Sakura shrugged. Someone was chasing us once and Gaara made the sand crush him. He had the headband thing with the funny squished rectangle. She tapped her own forehead. So Nico-sensei said it was okay, just that once, but Temari got kind of angry and they both told him not to do it again. Used sand to crush him. Kami. This girl probably had PTSD. But he's never hurt you? Shisui asked, just to make sure. The girl scowled up at him, surprisingly ferocious. No, she snapped. He doesn't hurt any of us. Good, said Shisui, for lack of anything else to say. Sakura subsided, mollified. How did you meet Nico-sensei? He asked, changing tack. She came to the secret hiding place too, Sakura explained. And Niji and Hinata and Sasuke and Hanabi were with her. She told all of us it wasn't safe and we had to leave, so we left. Shisui hummed. I see. Thank you for telling me this, Sakura-chan. She didn't want to take me with her, the girl said instead, staring up at him conspiratorially. She said there were too many kids already. But Naruto wouldn't leave without me. And with that, as Shisui sat frozen, she hopped off her rock and wandered back to the center of the camp. Shit, Shisui sighed. Hi, my name's Shisui. It's Temari, right? The girl gave him an eerily close approximation of Akino's "Are you dumb" face. Shisui smiled back, unconcerned. Can I call you Temari-chan? Fine, said the girl, in a manner that indicated it was anything other than fine. Shisui coughed. Right. Temari-chan. You must know how it looks, the Kazekige's daughter with a couple of Konoha's missing heirs. The girl raised an eyebrow. I don't know. How does it look? Direct approach it was. Why did you leave Tsunagakure? He asked. Why did you leave Konohagakure? She snipped back. Shisui gave her his best, bitter, I have seen some shit smile. I was kidnapped and experimented on for my Kekkei Genkai after a village elder stole my eye. Temari's eyes widened, but she quickly rallied. That would have been my brother, unless I got him out, she said, tilting her chin up. My father sent Umbu and assassins after Gaara. The night we left, he sent my uncle to kill him. Shisui blinked. Well, shit. He should have known better than to hope her story would be any better than Sakura's. I heard reports that he was unable to control his sand, he continued, after taking a moment to scrape his mental composure back together. Are they true? Are we all in danger of being smashed into little wet blobs in our sleep? They were, said the girl, unconcerned, and Shisui's heart dropped for a split second. But he has control over it now. I see, said Shisui noncommittally. How did that come about? He broke my arm, on accident. Temari didn't hesitate. And after that, he had enough incentive to control it. Okay, he said, after a pause. What rank were you, Temari-chan? Shisui caught flash of temper in her eyes, before it vanished into cool composure. I was an academy student, she answered neutrally. Shisui raised an eyebrow. You have an impressive knowledge base and developed chakra system for an academy student, he noted. Yes, said Temari. If only it mattered to the academy sensei. Whoa, sore spot. Maybe your sensei just wanted to make sure you had a childhood, he suggested, quashing a pang of regret it was a luxury he never had, or Itake, or Hatake, or even Zabuza. Temari tilted her head to the side. Maybe, she said, in a tone that said it was most definitely not. Well, Shisui wasn't here to find out about whatever internal politics that probably involved just yet. So, how did you end up as the single mother of 7? Temari's mouth quirked unwillingly into her first real smile. Dragged in by the cat, she said dryly. Gaara and I had been chased by Umbu halfway through AIM. We stopped in a village to steal food, well, I did, and Gaara wandered off while I was pickpocketing at the market. When I found him, this little blonde kid was just yammering away at him and Gaara let him. Temari shrugged. Nobody's been nice to Gaara besides me, so I was a little suspicious at first, but he said there were other kids with him and they had a dry place to stay and food. She shrugged again. I figured if it was an orphanage, Gaara and I could get back out easily. Was it just the 8 of you, then? Another distant smile. At first, yeah, said Temari. But then Nico-sensei came back. Her smile turned wry. Sai probably called her. She was pretty mad at Naruto, at first, for bringing back strange children, but once she figured out we weren't a threat and then who we were, she was kind of okay with it. Shisui pasted a skeptical expression on his face. Just like that. Temari rolled her eyes. Well, it wasn't that simple. She didn't even come back for a couple weeks, and when she did, I'd been helping the others out. Did you know they'd been eating instant ramen raw? Because they didn't know how to cook it. Her eyes were fond, despite the derisive tone. I taught them how to cook, and pickpocket, and some basic shinobi skills. That's a lot of effort, for a bunch of kids you didn't even know, Shisui pointed out. Yeah, said Temari, unconcerned. You care for them. Yeah, repeated Temari fiercely, tilting her chin up to stare at him defiantly. I wouldn't let anyone hurt them. Not even you, went unspoken. She jerked a thumb back at the camp. Can I go? One of those idiots is going to burn themselves playing with the fire. Yeah, go ahead, said Shisui, and watched her stride back to the center of the camp, inserting herself neatly into the huddle of children next to the fire. Shit, Shisui muttered empathetically. If any of them are spies, their cover is thorough, Heitake concluded, glancing back towards the fire. Zabuza was perched on a fallen tree a little ways away from the puppy pile of children, facing out into the darkened forest. Sakura seems harmless, Shisui agreed slowly. And I didn't sense anything malicious from Temari, though both Sakura and Hinata confirmed she is capable of at least genin-level skills. Sai as well, said Heitake. He claimed to have been recruited from the orphanage at age 7, and that he had been in the Umbu trainee program for a year before the fall. Shisui and Itaki exchanged glances. Is that normal? Asked Shisui. Gekao was tapped for Umbu when he was 7, Heitake mused. Uzuki at 9. It's not too unusual. There is a possibility he is a root trainee, said Itaki. All three were quiet. It's unlikely, said Heitake almost reluctantly. My Sharingan couldn't pick up any traces of genjutsu or deception from him. Shisui grimaced. You used that on a 10-year-old. Heitake's eye narrowed. It was necessary. He won't remember it. Sakura has the least reason to be here, noted Itaki after a pause. She is the logical suspect for a plant. Shisui shook his head. You've seen the way she moves. No way she's anything more than an academy student, and a beginning one at that. She was only orphaned during the fall, Heitake pointed out. Danzo doesn't like recruits with attachments. The fact that the Kazekige's children are here, however, is odd. Shisui snorted. Can it be anything other than a massive coincidence? Coincidences don't exist, quoted Itaki. Shisui resisted the urge to roll his eyes. So the Yondaime Kazekage heard that some clan kids from Konoha went missing and decided to send his daughter, not even a genin, and his youngest son, the Ichibai Jinhyuriki, on a Gallivant through the minor lands in hopes of conveniently running into these supposedly runaway kids, while as publicly as you can unpublicly admitting they'd left Tsunagakure. I suppose not, Itaka conceded after a pause. Though given the circumstances, it is strange that Cat 15 took them in. Maybe it was some kind of latent female maternal instinct, Heitake suggested half-heartedly. Shisui snorted. Let's not pretend you know anything about females, Teiko. You have to admit it's strategic, gaining authority over another Jinhyuriki. Heitake rolled his visible eye and jerked his head at Itaki. Is the Jinhyuriki stable? He seems to have his beast under control, said Itaki. Shisui went to nod agreement but hesitated. His sister seems to have a lot of influence over him, he said cagily. Over it. And the rest of them. We'll watch for that, concluded Heitake. For now it seems they'd be hostile if we tried to separate any of them. They've been through a lot together, Shisui mused, turning towards the huddle of children. We'll have to take care of their training, Heitake added grimly. Shisui jerked his head up incredulously, but Itaki had on his I agree but I don't necessarily like it face on, which was marginally different from his resting face. They're kids, he protested. They've been living on the run for years. They deserve to be kids for a bit. Heitake's tone was icily rational. Not one of us wasn't on the battlefield at their age. It's impractical to think the battle won't come to them. It's better that they have the tools to defend themselves. And when you need another soldier or two for the war? Shisui challenged, narrowing his eye. We are all soldiers, Heitake drawled, but his stare was deadly serious. When we are called to fight, we fight. Check the description for the links to the author.